In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a dusty painting hides a chilling secret. Why does its eerie glow unsettle even the bravest souls? Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and sharper mind, outbids a desperate stranger to claim it, uncovering a cryptic note that whispers of sorrow and betrayal. Is the painting truly cursed? Or does it guard a truth worth killing for? As shadows deepen and danger creeps closer, one question haunts her. What secret is worth such a deadly obsession? Chapter 1. The Auctions Alerth village of St. Mary Mead, with its quaint cottages and winding lanes, wore the golden haze of an early autumn afternoon. The air carried a crisp bite, mingling with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. Miss Jane Marple, her silver hair neatly pinned beneath a modest felt hat, stepped lightly along the cobbled path toward the village hall. Her eyes, sharp as ever despite her years, scanned the familiar surroundings not out of suspicion, but habit. One never knew what small detail might spark a revelation in a place like this, where secrets hid in plain sight. The hall itself was a sturdy, unpretentious building, its whitewashed walls glowing under the slanting sun. Today, it buzzed with an unusual energy. A banner strung across the entrance proclaimed Charity Auction Treasures of St. Mary Mead. In bold, if slightly uneven, letters, the event had drawn a crowd locals in their Sunday best, a few curious outsiders, and even a reporter from the Dannemouth Gazette, scribbling notes with a pencil stub. Miss Marple adjusted her gloves and joined the throng, her curiosity piqued by the promise of treasures and the whispers of something peculiar among the lots inside. The hall was a kaleidoscope of chatter and clinking teacups, tables lined, the walls laden with donations, chipped porcelain teapots, embroidered cushions, a tarnished silver candelabra, and stacks of leather-bound books that smelled of mildew. Miss Marple nodded politely to Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, who was fussing over a tray of scones, and sidestepped young Tommy Pierce, who was darting through the crowd with a tray of lemonade, splashing more than he served. Her attention, however, was drawn to the far corner, where a small, roped-off area displayed the auction's centerpiece items. A velvet-draped table held a few standout pieces, a jade figurine, a brass telescope, and, most intriguingly, a painting. It was unremarkable at first glance, a somber landscape of gnarled trees and a stormy sky, its colors muted by age. Yet something about it held her gaze. Perhaps it was the way the shadows seemed to shift, or the faint glint of gold in the frame, half hidden by dust. A handwritten card beside it read, Landscape, Artist Unknown, Provenance, Ashford Manor. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. Ashford Manor. The name stirred memories of village gossip tales of the reclusive Lord Ashford, who had lived there decades ago, before his mysterious disappearance. The manor had stood empty since, its gardens overgrown, its windows dark. She leaned closer, her keen eyes catching a faint inscription etched into the frame's lower edge to find the truth. Seek the sorrow. The words were cryptic, almost poetic, and they sent a shiver down her spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. Odd, isn't it? Came a voice at her elbow. Miss Marple turned to find Mr. Clement, the vicar, peering at the painting through his spectacles. His round face was flushed from the warmth of the crowded hall. They say it's cursed, you know, old village nonsense. Of course, but it does make one wonder. Cursed? Miss Marple's tone was light, but her eyes gleamed with interest. What sort of curse, Mr. Clement? Oh, the usual sort, he said, waving a hand. Misfortune follows its owner, or some such. Lord Ashford was said to be obsessed with it. Never let it out of his sight, they say, until he wasn't around anymore. He lowered his voice, as if the empty manor might overhear. Some claim it's why he vanished. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite skepticism. And yet here it is, up for auction. How curious. Indeed, Mr. Clement replied, glancing nervously at the painting. I suppose the new owners of the manor wanted rid of it. Can't say I blame them. Their conversation was interrupted by the sharp rap of a gavel. Mr. Petherick, the local solicitor and self-appointed auctioneer, stood at a podium, his bald head gleaming under the hall's lights. Ladies and gentlemen, he called, his voice cutting through the din. Let us begin. Lot 1. A charming set of bone china teacups. Miss Marple took a seat near the back, her knitting bag resting on her lap. She listened as the lots were sold off. Teacups to Mrs. Price, a tarnished pocket watch to old Mr. Haydock, a set of gardening tools to a delighted Tommy Pierce, who promptly began brandishing them like swords. But her attention kept drifting to the painting, now draped in shadow as the sun dipped lower. She noticed a man lingering near it, a stranger, thin and sallow, with a tweed coat too large for his frame. His eyes darted nervously, and his fingers twitched as he studied the painting, as if weighing a decision. The auction moved swiftly, and soon Mr. Petherick's voice boomed. Lot 23, the landscape painting from Ashford Manor, a fine piece of, well, let's call it rustic charm. Shall we start the bidding at £5? A murmur rippled through the crowd. £5 was modest, but the painting's reputation seemed to dampen enthusiasm. Miss Marple raised her hand, her bid calm but deliberate. £5. The stranger's head snapped up. He hesitated, then called £6. His voice was sharp, almost desperate, and heads turned to stare. Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his forehead. Despite the coolness of the hall, £7, she countered, her tone serene. She met his gaze, her eyes steady, and saw a flicker of unease in his gait. He shot back, his hand trembling as he raised it. The bidding climbed, each exchange drawing gasps from the crowd. Miss Marple remained unruffled, her bids precise, her expression unreadable. At £15, the stranger faltered, his lips pressing into a thin line. 16, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. 17, Miss Marple said firmly, her fingers pausing on her knitting needles. The stranger's shoulders slumped. He shook his head, and Mr. Petherick, sensing the end, called, Going once, going twice, sold to Miss Marple for £17. The gavel fell, and a smattering of applause broke out, tinged with curiosity. Miss Marple smiled faintly, ignoring the whispers around her. The stranger shot her a final, resentful glance before slipping into the crowd. She made her way to the table to claim her prize, her mind already turning over the encounter. Who was he, and why had he been so determined to win the painting? His desperation suggested more than mere fondness for art. As she paid Mr. Petherick, she overheard Mrs. Price gossiping with Mrs. Haydock. £17 for that dreary thing, and with all that talk of a curse. I'd not have it in my house for 100. Nor I, Mrs. Haydock replied, shuddering. But you know Jane Marple. She's got a nose for trouble. Miss Marple pretended not to hear, her lips twitching with amusement. She arranged for the painting to be delivered to her cottage, declining offers to carry it home herself. It's rather heavy, she said demurely, though she suspected it weighed less than the secrets it carried. The sun had set by the time she left the hall, the sky a deep indigo streaked with clouds. The village was quiet now, the auction's excitement fading into the evening's calm. Miss Marple walked slowly, her thoughts circling the painting, the inscription to find the truth. Seek the sorrow echoed in her mind, a riddle begging to be solved. She recalled the stranger's twitching fingers, the way his eyes had lingered on the frame rather than the canvas. There was something there. She was certain, something hidden in plain sight. At her cottage, Rose Cottage, she lit the lamps and set the kettle on. The painting arrived shortly after, carried by Tommy Pierce, who deposited it in her parlor with a wary glance. "You sure you want this, Miss Marple? Gives me the creeps." "Nonsense, Tommy," she said, pressing a shilling into his hand. "It's just a bit of paint and wood. Nothing to fear." He grinned, unconvinced, and scampered off. Miss Marple closed the door and turned to the painting, now propped against her armchair. In the lamplight, its colors seemed to shift, the stormy sky almost pulsing with life. She traced the frame's edges, her fingers brushing the inscription. Then, with a gentle press, she felt a slight give in the wood panel, cunningly concealed. Her heart quickened, but she maintained her composure. Using a letter opener, she pried open the panel, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside lay a folded slip of paper, yellowed with age. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the elegant, faded script. "The key to sorrow lies where shadows fall." Miss Marple sat back, the note in her lap, her tea forgotten. The painting was more than a curiosity, it was a puzzle, one that hinted at truths buried in the past. She thought of Lord Ashford, the stranger at the auction, and the whispers of a curse. Tomorrow, she would begin her inquiries, starting with the manor's history and the stranger's identity. For now, though, she was content. The day had brought a mystery, and she had taken the first step toward unraveling it. She rose, smoothed her skirt, and glanced at the painting one last time. Its shadows seemed to watch her, but Miss Marple was undaunted. She had faced shadows before, and she knew they often hid the most illuminating truths. With a satisfied nod, she turned down the lamp and retired to bed, the promise of discovery lulling her into a peaceful sleep. Chapter 2. The frame's whispered morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the worn oak floor. The painting from the auction rested on an easel in her parlor, its muted colors and indistinct figures seeming to shift in the soft light. To an untrained eye, it was a drab piece, barely worth the £5 she'd paid to outbid the twitchy stranger at the St. Mary Mead auction. But to Miss Marple, whose sharp eyes missed little, it was a puzzle wrapped in dust and whispers of a curse. She sipped her tea, her gaze fixed on the canvas, her mind already turning over the faint inscription she'd glimpsed on the frame the previous evening. "In shadow lies the key to sorrow." She set her cup down with a gentle clink and approached the painting, her slippers whispering against the floorboards. The frame was heavy, carved with faded floral motifs, its gilt flaking like autumn leaves. She traced the inscription with a fingertip, feeling the grooves of the letters. They were deliberate, etched with care, not the hasty scrawl of a forger. Her curiosity, always a restless creature, stirred. A hidden compartment, perhaps paintings of this sort told, unassuming, from estates with secrets often held surprises. She'd read of such things in novels and heard whispers in village gossip. But this was no fiction. This was hers to unravel. With a small screwdriver from her knitting basket, Miss Marple was nothing if not resourceful. She began to probe the frame's edges. The wood groaned softly, as if reluctant to yield its secrets. Her fingers, steady despite her years, worked with precision, and after a moment, a faint click sounded. A narrow panel, no wider than a matchbox, sprang open along the frame's inner lip. Inside was a folded slip of paper, yellowed with age, its edges brittle as dry leaves. She eased it out, careful not to tear it, and unfolded it under the light of a nearby lamp. The script was elegant, almost feminine, written in ink that had faded to a ghostly brown. It read, "The key to sorrow lies not in the heart, but in the hand that holds it. Seek the shadow's edge, where truth waits in silence." Miss Marple's lips pursed. Cryptic, certainly, but not meaningless. The words had the weight of intention, a riddle meant for someone specific. She turned the paper over, finding a faint sketch of a crustalian rampant, its claws clutching a broken arrow. It was unfamiliar, but her memory, sharp as a tack, filed it away. The painting itself, she noted, depicted a shadowed figure standing by a window, the background a blur of muted greens and grays. Was the shadow's edge a literal reference to the composition, or something more metaphorical? She tucked the note into her pocket and decided the village was the next step. St. Mary Mead, for all its sleepy charm, was a wellspring of gossip, and gossip, Miss Marple knew, was often the skeleton key to locked mysteries. She donned her coat, a sensible tweed, and her favorite had a modest affair with a single feather, and set out for the high street, the painting's enigma trailing her like a shadow. The village was bustling in its quiet way. Mrs. Bantry's roses were the talk of the season, their crimson blooms spilling over her garden wall. And the postman, young Tom, was making his rounds with a cheerful whistle. Miss Marple's first stop was the bakery, where Mrs. Pye, the baker's wife, held court over scones and scandal. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and Mrs. Pye looked up from her counter, her round face brightening. "Miss Marple, come for a bun, have you? Or is it news you're after?" Mrs. Pye's eyes twinkled, knowing full well that Miss Marple's visits were rarely just for pastries. "A bun, perhaps," Miss Marple said with a smile. "But I wouldn't say no to a bit of chat. That auction yesterday quite the affair, wasn't it?" Mrs. Pye leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, indeed. All those city folk sniffing about, and that odd Mr. Harrow, twitching like a cat in a storm. Did you see him eyeing that old painting you bought? Looked ready to bolt when you outbid him." Miss Marple nodded, her expression placid, but her mind alert. "I did notice. Do you know anything about that painting? It's rather unremarkable, yet it seemed to draw attention. Double quotes. Mrs. Pye wiped her hands on her apron, her brow furrowing. "Unremarkable, you say? Well, I heard it came from Ashford Manor. You know, that crumbling pile up the hill belonged to Lord Ashford, the old recluse. They say he was mad for that painting. Spent hours staring at it, muttering to himself. Some even said it was cursed, brought him nothing but grief." "Cursed?" Miss Marple's tone was light, but her eyes sharpened. "That's a strong word for a bit of canvas." Double quotes. Mrs. Pye shrugged, slicing a loaf with practiced ease. "Strong or not, that's what they said. Lord Ashford vanished, you know, poof, like smoke, nigh on 30 years ago. Left the manor to rot, and that painting to gather dust. My cousin Bert, he worked there as a lad, said the old man treated it like a shrine. Never let anyone touch it." Miss Marple filed this away, her mind already sketching connections. "And no one knows what became of him. Not a peep. Some say he ran off to the continent. Others say he died of a broken heart. Either way, that painting's got a story. Mark my words." Mrs. Pye handed her a warm bun wrapped in paper. "Mind you don't stir up trouble with it, Miss Marple." "Oh, I'm far too old for trouble," Miss Marple said with a chuckle, but her eyes gleamed with purpose as she left the bakery. Her next stop was the village library, a small stone building that smelled of polished wood and aging paper. Miss Weatherby, the librarian, was a thin, bird-like woman with a passion for local history and a memory almost as sharp as Miss Marple's. She was shelving books when Miss Marple arrived, her spectacles perched precariously on her nose. "Good," "Morning, Miss Weatherby," Miss Marple said, setting her basket on the counter. "I wonder if you might help me with a bit of research. I'm curious about Ashford Manor and its late owner." Miss Weatherby's eyes lit up. "Lord Ashford. Oh. Now there's a tale. A tragic figure. Really? Let me fetch the records." She bustled to a back room, returning with a leather-bound ledger and a stack of yellowed newspapers. "These mention the manor and the family. Not much. Mind you, Lord Ashford was private, even before he turned hermit." Miss Marple settled at a table, her fingers leafing through the brittle pages. The ledger noted the Ashford family's lineage, tracing back to the 17th century. Lord Reginald Ashford, the last of the line, had inherited the manor in 1885 at the age of 30. He was described as scholarly, reserved, and unmarried, with a passion for art and botany. The newspapers, however, painted a darker picture. A 1895 article mentioned his withdrawal from society after a personal tragedy, with vague hints of a scandal. Another, dated 1897, reported his disappearance, noting that the manor had been left untouched, its contents including a peculiar painting, sold off to settle debts. The crest from the note caught her eye in a faded sketch in the ledger. The lion and broken arrow, identified as the Ashford family seal. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The note's author, then, was likely connected to the family, perhaps intimately so. But who? And why hide it in the frame? She thanked Miss Weatherby and stepped back into the crisp autumn air, her mind buzzing. Ashford Manor was the logical next step, but she needed more context. She decided to visit Mrs. Price, her closest friend in the village, whose knack for overhearing the right conversations was unmatched. Mrs. Price lived in a cozy cottage at the edge of St. Mary Mead, its garden a riot of late-blooming asters. She welcomed Miss Marple with a pot of tea and a plate of biscuits, her round face alight with curiosity. "Jane, you've got that look," Mrs. Price said, pouring tea. "What's got your nose twitching this time?" Miss Marple smiled, nibbling a biscuit. "Just a bit of curiosity about that painting I bought. It's from Ashford Manor, and I've heard some intriguing tales. Do you know anything about Lord Ashford's habits, or that painting of his?" Mrs. Price's eyes widened. "Oh, that old place. Gives me the shivers just thinking of it. My aunt used to clean there, you know, before it was abandoned. She said Lord Ashford was obsessed with that painting. Used to talk to it, she said, like it was a person. Kept it in his study, locked, away from everyone. She swore she saw it glow once. But you know how Aunt Millie was fond of her sherry." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Glow, you say? That's quite a claim. Well, maybe not glow, but something odd about it. Aunt Millie said it was a woman's portrait, but the face was always blurry, somehow, like it didn't want to be seen. And Lord Ashford, he'd sit there for hours, writing in a little book, muttering about shadows and sorrow. Right peculiar. He was—" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. A blurry face, a cryptic note, a vanished lord. This was no ordinary painting. "Did your aunt ever mention a crest? A lion with a broken arrow?" Mrs. Price frowned, tapping her chin. "Not that I recall, but she did say he had a box with a funny seal on it. Kept it locked tight, never let her near it. Could that be it?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral but her thoughts anything but. "And no one ever saw what was in that box, not a soul, when he vanished. The manor was picked clean by creditors. If that box was there, it's long gone." Mrs. Price leaned closer. "You think that painting's hiding something, don't you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I think it's telling a story, Dolly. and I mean to hear it. By late afternoon, Miss Marple was back in her parlor, the painting before her once more. She studied the canvas with renewed focus, noting the way the figure's shadow seemed to bleed into the background, almost as if it were a doorway. The note's words echoed in her mind. Seek the shadow's edge. She tilted the painting, letting the light play across it, and noticed a faint irregularity in the painted line. Barely visible, that traced the shadow's outline. Was it a clue to another hidden compartment, or something painted into the work itself? She decided to test her theory. With a magnifying glass, she examined the shadow's edge, her breath catching as she spotted tiny, deliberate brush strokes forming a patterned series of dots and dashes like Morse code. She copied them into her notebook. Dot dot dash. Dot dash dot 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 dash dot 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 dash. Decoding it, she whispered the results. Angela. Under Ella. Under something else. The name tugged at her memory, but no clear connection surfaced. She jotted it down, her excitement tempered by caution. This was a thread, but not the whole tapestry. As evening fell, Miss Marple lit a fire and settled into her armchair, her notebook open on her lap. The day's findings were promising. The note, the crust, Lord Ashford's obsession, and now this coded message. Ashford Manor loomed large in her mind, its decaying halls likely holding more answers. She sketched a plan to visit the manor the next day, perhaps with the caretaker's permission, though she suspected he'd be less than eager. The painting, she felt, was not just a relic but a map to a truth buried in the past, a truth tied to sorrow, shadows, and perhaps a betrayal. She closed her notebook, her movements precise, her mind alight with possibilities. The painting sat quietly on its easel, its secrets whispering just beyond her reach. Miss Marple smiled faintly, satisfied with her progress, but hungry for more. Tomorrow, she would step into the manor's shadows, and she had no doubt they would have much to say. Chapter 3. Shadows of Ashford Manor. The morning air in St. Mary Mead was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-soaked grass and the distant tang of chimney smoke. Miss Jane Marple, her sensible wool coat buttoned against the autumn chill, stepped lightly along the winding path toward Ashford Manor. Her eyes, sharp as ever despite the fine lines etched around them, scanned the hedgerows and the rolling hills beyond. The manor loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the pale sky, a crumbling relic of grandeur, its ivy-clad towers and broken gargoyles whispering of forgotten opulence. Miss Marple's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of the mystery that had begun at the peculiar auction 2 days prior. The painting she had acquired, dusty, unremarkable to most, yet pulsing with an eerie allure, had set her instincts tingling. The cryptic note hidden in its frame, with its mention of a key to sorrow, had only deepened her curiosity. Lord Ashford, the manor's last master, had vanished decades ago, and the painting, tied to his name, seemed to hold secrets the village had long buried. Today, she intended to unearth them. The gravel crunched under her sturdy shoes as she approached. The manor's iron gates, rusted and half ajar. A figure emerged from the shadows of the gatehouse, a man in his 60s, weary and weathered, with a face like crumpled parchment. This was Mr. Gideon Wells, the caretaker, whose family had tended Ashford Manor for generations. His eyes, small and wary, flickered over her with a mix of recognition and reluctance. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his frayed cap. His voice was gravelly, as if seldom used. "Didn't expect you so early. The manor's no place for a morning stroll, you know." "Good morning, Mr. Wells," she replied, her tone warm but laced with purpose. "I've come to see the manor, if you'd be so kind as to show me about. I'm particularly interested in anything connected to Lord Ashford's time here." Wells hesitated, his fingers tightening around the gate's edge. It's not a welcoming place, miss. Drafty, dark, and, well, folks say it's cursed. His eyes darted toward the manor's shadowed windows, as if expecting something to peer back. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. Curses are often just stories we tell to explain what we don't understand, Mr. Wells. Shall we? With a sigh, the caretaker pushed the gate open, its hinges shrieking in protest. They stepped onto the overgrown drive, where weeds choked the once manicured lawns. The manor itself was a study in decay, its stone facade cracked, its windows clouded with grime, and its chimneys leaning like weary sentinels. Yet there was a strange beauty to it. Miss Marple thought a melancholy elegance that spoke of lives lived and secrets kept. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the faint must of mildew. The grand hall stretched before them, its marble floor dulled, but still gleaming faintly under shafts of light that pierced the tattered curtains. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring down with haughty, faded gazes. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on each face, searching for clues in their stern expressions. Lord Ashford's family. Mostly, Wells muttered, following her gaze. Generations of them, all gone now. His lordship was the last, and he wasn't. Right in the end? Not right. Miss Marple asked, her tone gently probing as she paused before a portrait of a man with sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes. The brass plaque read Lord Edmund Ashford, 1878. Wells shifted uncomfortably. Obsessed, some said, with that painting. You bought, mostly. Spent hours staring at it, muttering about keys and sorrows. Folk thought he'd lost his wits. Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. And the painting hung here, in the manor, in the library, mostly. His lordship's private sanctum. I can show you, but it's a mess book scattered. Furniture rotting. Nobody's touched it since he vanished. Perfect, she said, her eyes bright with anticipation. I'd like to see it. Wells led her through a maze of corridors, each one darker and narrower than the last. The manor seemed to groan under its own weight, floorboards creaking and distant drips echoing in unseen corners. Miss Marple's keen senses noted every detail, a frayed tapestry depicting a hunt, a cracked mirror reflecting a sliver of her own face, a faint draft that carried the scent of old roses. The manor was alive with its own history, and she felt it pressing against her, urging her to listen. The library was a cavernous room, its high shelves sagging under the weight of moldering books. A massive oak desk dominated the center, its surface littered with yellowed papers and broken quills. Above the fireplace hung a faint outline on the wall, a rectangle of cleaner plaster, where the painting had once resided. Miss Marple's heart quickened. This was where the mystery had lived, where Lord Ashford had wrestled with whatever secrets the painting held. Mind your step, Wells warned, pointing to a pile of splintered wood that had once been a chair. Place hasn't been aired out in years. Miss Marple moved carefully, her eyes scanning the room. She knelt by the desk, running her fingers along its edges, searching for anything out of place. Her touch was light but deliberate, like a pianist playing a familiar tune. Then, beneath the desk's lip, her fingers brushed against something smooth, a small, hidden drawer. Her pulse quickened as she eased it open, revealing a single sheet of paper, its edges curled with age. The paper was a torn page from a diary, written in a hurried, elegant hand. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and read aloud softly, so as not to startle Wells, who hovered nervously by the door. June 12, 1892. She is my ruin and my salvation. Her brush captures truths I cannot bear, yet I cannot look away. The key to sorrow lies within her work, hidden where none But I would seek it. If I am to be damned, let it be for her. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. The words were heavy with passion and despair, hinting at a forbidden romance tied to the painting. She slipped the page into her handbag, her mind already racing with possibilities. Who was she? The artist, perhaps. And what was the key to sorrow mentioned in both the note and this diary entry? Find something, Wells asked, his voice tight. Just a bit of old paper, Miss Marple said lightly, straightening up. Nothing to trouble you about. Tell me, Mr. Wells, were there any rumors about Lord Ashford and a woman, an artist? Perhaps Wells's face darkened. You're poking at old wounds, miss. There were whispers. A lady painter, not from these parts. Eliza, they called her, came and went like a ghost. Left his lordship in a state. Some say she cursed that painting. Made it so no one could own it without grief. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind alight. And where might one find more about this Eliza? Wells shrugged, his unease growing. Gone, like his lordship. Nobody knows where. You'd do well to leave it be, miss. That paintings brought nothing but trouble. They moved on, exploring other rooms in the manor. In a dusty parlor, Miss Marple found a small portrait of a young woman, her face half hidden by a veil, but her eyes strikingly vivid. The frame bore no name, but something about the brushwork felt familiar, echoing the style of her auction painting. She made a mental note to compare them later. As they ascended a creaking staircase to the upper floors, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Locked doors lined the hallway, their brass knobs tarnished but oddly polished in places, as if someone had tried them recently. Miss Marple paused before one door, its wood scarred with deep scratches, as if clawed by desperate hands. What's behind this one? She asked, her voice calm but insistent. Wells's face paled. His lordship's private study. Nobody's been in there since he left. I don't have the key. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. No key? How curious. Perhaps we could try another way. Wells shook his head vehemently. No, miss. That room's bad luck. I've heard things scratching, whispers, like the manor itself is alive. You don't want to go meddling. She studied him for a moment, noting the sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. He was hiding something, but pressing him now would yield nothing. Instead, she smiled and said, Very well, Mr. Wells. Perhaps another time. They continued their tour, but the manor's atmosphere grew heavier with each step. In a forgotten music room, a harpsichord sat silent, its keys yellowed like old teeth. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the lid, and a faint note hummed. Unbidden, making Wells jump. Wind, he muttered, though the air was still. Miss Marple said nothing, but her mind catalogued the moment. The manor was indeed alive, not with ghosts, perhaps, but with secrets that clung to its walls like damp. As they descended to the ground floor, she noticed a faint trail of footprints in the dust, leading to a side door. They were fresh, too large to be Wells's, and the realization sent a shiver through her. Someone else had been here, perhaps watching her even now. Outside, the sky had darkened, heavy clouds promising rain. Wells locked the gate behind them, his hands trembling slightly. You've seen enough, I reckon, he said. Best not. Come back, miss. The manor doesn't like visitors. Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. Thank you for your time, Mr. Wells. You've been most helpful. As she walked back to the village, her umbrella tapping the ground, her mind churned with new leads. The diary page, the mysterious Eliza, the locked study, the fresh footprints, all pieces of a puzzle that was growing more intricate by the hour. She felt the familiar thrill of the chase, tempered by her usual calm. The manor's gloom lingered in her thoughts, but so did her determination to unravel its secrets. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, the diary page spread before her. She sipped her tea, now cold, and began to sketch a plan in her notebook. The manor held more answers, and she would return key or no key. For now, she was content with her day's discoveries. Her heart steady, her curiosity a quiet flame that burned brighter with each clue. Chapter 4. The vicar's Talith morning sun spilled through the vicarage windows, casting a warm glow over the cluttered parlor where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles clicking softly in rhythm with the ticking of an ancient grandfather clock. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a comforting blend that wrapped around her like a familiar shawl. Across from her, the elderly vicar, Reverend Clement, adjusted his spectacles, his hands trembling slightly as he poured tea from a chipped porcelain pot. The steam curled upward, catching the light, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in his fingers, a sign of age, perhaps, or something more. "Thank you for seeing me, Reverend," she said, her voice gentle but probing, like a needle threading through fabric. "I've been puzzling over that painting from the auction. It's quite the curiosity, don't you think?" Reverend Clement's eyes flickered with something recognition, perhaps, or unease. He set the teapot down with a clink. "The Ashford painting, you mean?" "Yes, I heard you acquired it." Quite a stir in the village. His tone was cautious, as if he were stepping around broken glass. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp behind their mild facade. "Oh, it's more than a stir. There's a story behind it, I'm sure. And you, dear Reverend, have been in St. Mary Mead longer than most. I thought you might know something of Lord Ashford's connection to it." The vicar hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of his saucer. He was a small man, his face edged with lines that told of decades spent tending souls and weathering village gossip. His hesitation was not lost on Miss Marple. She had seen it before in those who held secrets too heavy to share lightly. "Well," he began, clearing his throat, "it's an old tale, Miss Marple, and not one I've spoken of in years. Lord Ashford, God rest his soul, was a peculiar man. Brilliant, but haunted, you might say. And that painting—" He trailed off, glancing toward the window as if expecting to see the man himself standing in the garden. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her knitting paused. "Haunted by the painting, you mean, or something else?" Reverend Clement sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of memory. "Both, perhaps. Let me tell you what I know, or rather, what I pieced together from whispers and confessions over the years. It's a story of love, betrayal, and a darkness that clung to Ashford Manor like ivy." The vicar's tale began in the spring of 1892, when St. Mary Mead was a quieter place, its lanes less trodden by strangers. Lord Reginald Ashford, then in his prime, was the master of Ashford Manor, a sprawling estate that loomed over the village like a brooding giant. He was a man of wealth and intellect, with a penchant for art and a reputation for keeping his own counsel. But that spring, a new figure arrived in the village, a woman named Eliza Vane, an artist of modest renown, whose arrival sparked whispers among the villagers. She was a striking woman, Reverend Clement said, his voice softening with a haze of recollection. Dark hair, eyes like storm clouds, and a way of moving that made you think she carried secrets in her very bones. She came to paint portraits for the gentry, or so she said, but it was Lord Ashford who took her under his wing. He commissioned her to paint something extraordinary, a work that would capture the soul of his estate, he said. Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft clicking, a counterpoint to the vicar's words. "And that was the painting I bought." The vicar nodded. I believe so. It was no ordinary piece, even then. Eliza worked on it for months. Cloistered in the manor's west wing, the servants whispered that she and Lord Ashford grew close to close. There were rumors of midnight meetings, of laughter echoing through the halls, of a passion that defied propriety. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, not in judgment, but in thought. A love affair, then. But what made it tragic? The vicar's eyes darkened. It wasn't just love, Miss Marple. There was something unnatural about it. The painting became their obsession. Lord Ashford spoke of it as if it held a secret, something only he and Eliza understood. The villagers began to talk of a curse, said the painting was cursed, because it was born of sin. And then, one night, Eliza vanished. Vanished? Miss Marple's voice was soft, but her mind was racing. Without a trace. Not quite, the vicar said, leaning back in his chair. She left the painting behind, unfinished. Or so they thought. Lord Ashford was never the same. He locked himself away, refused visitors, and the manor fell into neglect. Some said he was searching for her, others that he was hiding something. And then, a year later, he too was gone, disappeared without a word. The painting was stored in the manor's attic, forgotten until the auction. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the vicar's words like a prospector panning for gold. And the curse? What did the villagers say it was? Reverend. Clement's hands tightened around his cup. They said the painting carried Eliza's sorrow, that it brought misfortune to anyone who owned it. A fanciful notion, perhaps, but there were stories servants who fell ill, guests who saw strange shadows, accidents that defied explanation. I never believed in curses, Miss Marple, but I saw Lord Ashford's face the last time he came to church. He looked like a man who'd seen the devil himself. The room fell silent, save for the clock's steady tick and the faint rustle of Miss Marple's knitting. She set her needles down, her eyes narrowing slightly. Reverend, you mentioned Eliza's appearance. Do you happen to have any record of her, a photograph? Perhaps. The vicar's face brightened, as if grateful for a change of topic. As it happens, I do. The church kept records of notable visitors, and Eliza was certainly that. Let me fetch it. He rose, his movements slow but purposeful, and shuffled to a sideboard piled high with papers and books. After a moment of rummaging, he produced a small, leather-bound album, its pages yellowed with age. He flipped through it carefully, then paused, sliding a faded photograph across the table to Miss Marple. She took it gently, her fingers brushing the sepia-toned image. It showed a woman in a high-necked dress, her dark hair pinned loosely, her eyes gazing directly at the camera with an intensity that seemed to pierce the decades. Miss Marple's breath caught. The face was unmistakable. She had seen it, or one strikingly similar, at the auction. The woman who had lingered at the edge of the crowd, her eyes fixed on the painting with a hunger Miss Marple had not understood until now. This is remarkable, she said, her voice steady despite the quickening of her pulse. She bears a striking resemblance to someone I saw at the auction. A young woman, perhaps a descendant. The vicar's eyebrows rose. A descendant. That's curious. I hadn't heard of any family connected to Eliza, but then she was a mystery even in her time. No one knew where she came from or where she went. Miss Marple tucked the photograph into her handbag, her mind already weaving connections. Thank you, Reverend. This has been most illuminating. May I keep the photograph for now? I'll return it. Of course, he said, though his eyes lingered on the photograph as if reluctant to let it go. But be careful, Miss Marple. That painting, it has a way of stirring things best left alone. She smiled, a small, reassuring smile that belied the spark of determination in her eyes. "Oh, I'm always careful, Reverend. But I do love a puzzle." As Miss Marple stepped out of the carriage, the afternoon air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. The village of St. Mary Mead stretched before her, its cottages and hedgerows bathed in the soft light of late spring. She walked slowly, her mind turning over the vicar's tale like a stone smoothed by a river. Eliza Vane, Lord Ashford, the painting. The curse each piece was a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to understand. She paused by the village green, where children played and a pair of elderly women gossiped by the postbox. One of them, Mrs. Price, waved her over, her face alight with curiosity. "Jane Marple, you've been up to something, haven't you?" Mrs. Price said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I heard you were at the vicarage, poking about that painting. What's it all about?" Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, just a bit of history. Dully nothing to fuss over." But Mrs. Price was not so easily deterred. "History? My foot. You've got that look in your eye, the one you get when you're unraveling something. Come on, give me a hint." Miss Marple considered, her fingers brushing the photograph in her handbag. She trusted Mrs. Price, but she also knew the village's appetite for gossip. A single word could set tongues wagging, and she wasn't ready to share her suspicions just yet. "Let's just say," she said, choosing her words carefully, "that the painting has a story to tell. And I'm only beginning to hear it." Double quotes Mrs. Price huffed, clearly unsatisfied. But Miss Marple's gentle smile was a wall she couldn't breach. With a promise to meet for tea later in the week, Miss Marple continued her walk, her mind returning to the photograph. The woman at the auction, could she truly be a descendant of Eliza Vane? And if so, what did she want with the painting? Was it sentiment or something darker? By the time she reached her cottage, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. She settled into her armchair by the fire, the painting propped against the wall where she could study it. Its surface, though dusty and unremarkable to the untrained eye, seemed to pulse with secrets. The faint inscription on the frame, the cryptic note about a key to sorrow, and now the vicar's tale of a tragic love affair, it was all connected, she was sure. She opened her notebook, its pages already filled with neat, precise handwriting. She jotted down the key points. Eliza Vane, artist, 1892. Lord Ashford's obsession. Painting as a secret. Vanishing. Curse rumors. Auction woman possible descendant. Beside the last note, she added a question mark, followed by a single word. "Why?" The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across the room. Miss Marple sipped her tea, now cold in its cup, and let her mind wander. The painting was more than a work of art. It was a map, a confession, a warning. And the woman at the auction, with her haunted eyes, was a piece of the puzzle she couldn't yet place. As the clock struck 7, she set her notebook aside and picked up her knitting. The rhythm of the needles was soothing, a counterpoint to the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. She was satisfied with her progress. The vicar's tale had given her a foundation, a thread to pull. But the puzzle was far from complete, and she knew the next steps would require care, cunning, and perhaps a touch of courage. Outside, the village settled into evening, its lights winking like stars against the gathering dusk. Miss Marple glanced at the painting one last time, its eerie aura softened by the firelight. "You've kept your secrets long enough," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "But I'll find them out." And with that, she turned her attention to her knitting, her heart calm, her mind alight with the thrill of the chase. The next morning, Miss Marple rose early, her routine as precise as a metronome. She breakfasted on toast and marmalade, her eyes drifting to the painting as she planned her day. The photograph of Eliza Vane lay on the table, its edges curling slightly. She studied it again, noting the delicate curve of the woman's jaw, the intensity of her gaze. The resemblance to the auction woman was uncanny, but resemblance alone was not proof. She needed more, something concrete, a link that would tie the past to the present. Her first stop was the village post office, where Miss Hartnell, the postmistress, held court behind a counter cluttered with stamps and parcels. Miss Hartnell was fond of village knowledge, though her information was often tinged with exaggeration. Still, Miss Marple knew how to sift truth from embellishment. "Good morning, Miss Hartnell," she said, her smile warm but calculated. "I was wondering if you'd heard anything about a young woman at the auction last week. Dark hair, rather striking, kept to herself." Miss Hartnell's eyes gleamed with interest. "Oh, you mean the stranger?" "Yes, I noticed her. Didn't say much, but she was watching that painting of yours like it was the crown jewels. I heard she's staying at the Blue Boar, though she's not the chatty sort. Foreign, maybe, or just shy." Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. The Blue Boar was the village's only inn, a modest establishment that rarely saw strangers. If the woman was staying there, it would be easy enough to inquire further discreetly, of course. "Thank you, Miss Hartnell," she said, purchasing a few stamps she didn't need. "You're always so helpful." As she left the post office, a plan began to form. The Blue Boar was her next destination, but she would need a pretext or reason to visit without rousing suspicion. She decided on a simple one: delivering a church pamphlet, a task she often undertook for Reverend Clement. It was plausible, unremarkable, and perfectly suited to her purpose. The Blue Boar was a half-timbered building at the edge of the village, its sign creaking in the breeze. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ale and polished wood. The innkeeper, Mr. Dobbs, greeted her with a nod, his apron stained from a morning's work. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said. "What brings you here? Not often we see you." "At the Boar," she smiled, holding up a stack of pamphlets. "Just dropping off some reading for your guests, Mr. Dobbs. Reverend Clement's latest sermon. I hear you have a new visitor, a young woman. Perhaps." Mr. Dobbs scratched his chin. Miss Clara Vane. Checked in a few days ago. Keeps to herself, mostly. Though she's been asking about the auction. Funny thing, she seemed mighty interested in that painting you bought." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. "Clara Vane, you say? How interesting. Is she in now?" "Nah, she's out," Mr. Dobbs said, gesturing vaguely toward the door. "Said she was going for a walk, maybe up by the manor. She's got a sketchbook with her, always drawing." Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. Clara Vane, a name that echoed Eliza's, and a connection to the manor. It was too neat to be coincidence. She left the inn, her pamphlets untouched, and headed toward Ashford Manor. Her steps brisk despite her age. The manor was a mile's walk, but she relished the exercise, her thoughts sharpening with each step. The manor loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls somber against the bright sky. Miss Marple slowed as she approached, her eyes scanning the grounds. There, near a crumbling fountain, stood a young woman with dark hair, her sketchbook open as she penciled furiously. Miss Marple recognized her at once, the woman from the auction, now Clara Vane, her face a mirror of the photograph in her handbag. She approached quietly, her footsteps muffled by the grass. "Good morning," she called, her voice light but firm. "It's a fine day for sketching, isn't it?" Clara started, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. She turned, her eyes wary but composed. "Oh, hello. Yes, it's inspiring here. Her voice was low, with a hint of an accent Miss Marple couldn't quite place. I'm Jane Marple, she said, offering a smile. We were at the auction together, I believe. You seemed quite taken with that old painting. Clara's expression tightened, but she nodded. It's a curious piece. I've always been drawn to old art, especially from places like this. She gestured toward the manor, her hand trembling slightly. Miss Marple noted the tremor, filing it away. It does have a story, doesn't it? I've been learning a bit about it myself. Lord Ashford, Eliza Vane, quite a tale. Clara's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. You've been digging, haven't you? Well, it's no secret that the painting's tied to the manor. I'm just curious, like you. Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind was alight. Clara was hiding something, her nervousness, her presence at the manor, her name. It was all too deliberate. But pressing her now would yield nothing. She needed to build trust, to coax the truth out slowly. Perhaps we could compare notes sometime, Miss Marple said, her tone inviting. I'm at Rose Cottage, just down the lane. You're welcome anytime. Clara nodded, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Miss Marple. I'll keep that in mind. As Miss Marple turned to leave, she glanced back, catching Clara's eyes on the manor, her sketchbook forgotten. There was a hunger in that gaze, a desperation that spoke of more than curiosity. Miss Marple walked home, her mind buzzing with possibilities, her heart calm, but her resolve firm. That evening, she sat by her fire, the painting before her, its surface seeming to shift in the flickering light. She opened her notebook, adding, new entries, Clara Vane, possible descendant, at Blue Boar, sketching at manor. Knows more than she says. Beside Clara's name, she drew another question mark, followed by a single word, dangerous. The photograph of Eliza lay beside her, its eyes seeming to watch her. Miss Marple sipped her tea, now cooled again, and let her thoughts settle. The vicar's tale had given her a foundation. Clara's presence a new thread to pull. The puzzle was growing, its pieces sharper and more intricate than she'd expected. But she was Jane Marple, and no puzzle, however dark, could resist her for long. She picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly, and smiled into the firelight. The game was afoot, and she was ready for the next move. Chapter 5. The strangers returned. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. Her parlor, a cozy haven of chintz armchairs and neatly ranged bookshelves, hummed with the quiet orderliness she cherished. The painting from the auction rested against the wall, its dusty canvas catching glints of light that seemed to shift unnaturally, as if the artwork itself were restless. Miss Marple, in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, sat at her small writing desk, her sharp eyes tracing the cryptic note she'd found in the frame's hidden compartment. The key to sorrow lies where shadows fall. The words, penned in elegant, faded ink, seemed to pulse with secrets yet to be unraveled. She sipped her morning tea, the delicate china cup warming her hands, and pondered the nervous stranger from the auction. His furtive glances, the way his fingers twitched as he bit against her, lingered in her memory. He had wanted the painting desperately, yet something in his demeanor, fear, perhaps, had made him falter. Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of observing the quiet undercurrents of village life, told her he was no mere collector. There was a story behind his agitation, and she intended to uncover it. The brass knocker on her front door thudded twice, interrupting her thoughts. She set her cup down with care, smoothed her cardigan, and crossed the room to answer. Standing on her doorstep was the very man she'd been thinking of, his thin frame wrapped in a slightly crumpled overcoat, Despite the mild weather, his face, pale and sharp-featured, bore the same nervous energy she'd noticed at the auction. His eyes darted past her into the cottage, as if searching for something. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but laced with the gentle authority of someone who missed nothing. "Mr. Harrow, I presume," the man started, clearly surprised she knew his name. "Why, yes, Miss Marple," he stammered, his fingers twisting the brim of his hat. I hope I'm not intruding. I've come about the painting." Miss Marple's lips curved into a polite smile, though her eyes remained watchful. "Not at all. Do come in. I was just about to have another pot of tea. Would you care for some?" Harrow hesitated, then nodded, stepping into the parlor with the caution of a man entering a lion's den. As he sat in the armchair she gestured to, Miss Marple busied herself at the tea tray, her movements deliberate, giving her time to steady him. His coat was well made, but worn at the cuffs, suggesting a man of modest means who clung to appearances. His eyes flicked repeatedly to the painting, propped against the wall like an uninvited guest. "It's a curious piece, isn't it?" she said lightly, pouring tea into a second cup. "Not much to look at, but it seems to draw attention all the same." Harrow's fingers tightened around his hat. "It's more than it seems," he said, his voice low. "Miss Marple, I must be frank. That painting belongs to my family. It was taken from us years ago, and I've been searching for it ever since. I beg you to sell it to me." Miss Marple handed him the cup, her expression serene, but her mind racing. His story had the ring of truth, but there was a rehearsed quality to it, as if he'd practiced the words in a mirror. "Your family, you say, how fascinating. Might I ask how it was taken?" Harrow's gaze dropped to the tea, which he hadn't touched. "It's a long story. My great-uncle was eccentric. He owned the painting, but after his death, it vanished. We thought it lost until I saw it at the auction." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "It's all I have left of him. Please, name your price." Miss Marple tilted her head, her silver hair catching the light. "Sentimental value is a powerful thing," she said softly. "But I wonder, Mr. Harrow, why you didn't mention this at the auction. You seemed quite anxious there, but not for family heirlooms." His face flushed, and he set the cup down with a clatter. I was taken aback, seeing it so suddenly. I didn't expect it to surface in St. Mary Mead, of all places, indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as ever, but with a steel edge. "St. Mary Mead does have a way of surprising people. Tell me, what makes this painting so special to your family?" Harrow shifted in his seat, his eyes darting to the painting again. "It's a portrait of my great-uncle's sister, painted by a local artist. It's not valuable in money, but in memory." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small sketchbook, flipping it open to a pencil drawing of the painting's frame. "I made this to remember it by, in case I couldn't retrieve it." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly as she noted the sketch. It was detailed, almost obsessively so, with every carve and flourish of the frame meticulously reproduced. She leaned forward, her voice warm but probing. "That's a fine drawing. You've captured the frame perfectly, though I wonder why you focus so much on it, rather than the painting itself." Harrow froze, his fingers tightening on the sketchbook. I just wanted to be thorough," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stood abruptly, tucking the sketchbook back into his coat. "I have taken enough of your time, Miss Marple. Please, consider my offer. I'll pay whatever you ask." Miss Marple rose with him, her movements unhurried. "I'll think it over, Mr. Harrow. Do leave me your card so I can reach you." He fumbled in his pocket, producing a slightly bent card with his name Edward Harrow and an address in London. As he handed it to her, his fingers brushed the edge of the sketchbook, and it slipped from his coat, landing open on the floor. Miss Marple bent to retrieve it, her eyes catching a glimpse of another sketch map, perhaps, with cryptic markings that mirrored the painting's inscription. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Harrow said, snatching the sketchbook back before she could examine it further. His face was pale now, his earlier composure fraying. "Thank you for your time, Miss Marple. I'll be in touch." She saw him to the door, her smile unwavering. "Do take care, Mr. Harrow. The roads can be treacherous this time of year." As the door closed behind him, Miss Marple's smile faded. She returned to the parlor, her eyes lingering on the spot where the sketchbook had fallen. Something about Harrow's story didn't sit right. The sketch of the frame was too precise, too deliberate, and that map those markings suggested. He knew more about the painting's secrets than he let on. She crossed to her desk, where her knitting lay neatly folded, and picked up her needles, the familiar rhythm soothing her racing thoughts. But her mind was far from idle. She replayed every detail of Harrow's visit, his nervous tics, the way he avoided her gaze when speaking of his great-uncle, the sketchbook's cryptic contents. And then there was the painting itself, its eerie presence seeming to watch her from the corner of the room. A soft creak from the floorboards above broke her reverie. Her cottage was old, prone to settling, but this sound was too deliberate, too measured. She set her knitting down and rose, her movements silent as she glided to the foot of the stairs. The air felt heavier now, charged with an unseen presence. She climbed the steps slowly, her hand trailing along the polished banister, her senses alert. In her study, a small room lined with books and papers, she found the source of her unease. A drawer in her desk was slightly ajar, not enough to notice at a glance, but enough for Miss Marple's meticulous eye. She opened it fully, her heart quickening as she saw her notes on the painting, neatly stacked but slightly misaligned, as if someone had rifled through them. "HMM," she murmured, her lips pursing. She checked the rest of the room, her gaze sweeping over the bookshelves, the window latch, the rug. Nothing else seemed disturbed, but the air carried a faint scent of tobacco, not hers, and certainly not from her usual visitors. Harrow had been in her parlor the entire time, hadn't he? Or had he slipped away while she prepared the tea? Miss Marple returned to the parlor, her mind piecing together the puzzle. Harrow's visit had been a performance, she was certain. But to what end? The sketchbook suggested he was after the painting's secrets, perhaps the same ones hidden in the frame's cryptic note. And now, someone, Harrow, or an accomplice, had searched her study. The painting, it seemed, was drawing trouble to her doorstep. She sat by the fire, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts were far from the soft click of needles. She needed to know more about Edward Harrow. His London address was a start, but she suspected he wouldn't be easy to find. Men like him, nervous, yet cunning, tended to slip through the cracks of polite society. She would have to follow him discreetly and see where his trail led. The clock on the mantel chimed softly, marking the hour. Miss Marple glanced at the painting, its shadowy form seeming to shift in the firelight. "You're quite the troublemaker, aren't you?" she said softly, as if addressing an old friend. She rose, her movements brisk, and began to plan her next steps, a trip to London, perhaps, to dig into Harrow's background, or a quiet word with Mrs. Price, whose knack for village gossip might unearth something about the stranger's movements. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill, the quiet excitement of a mystery unfolding. Harrow thought he could outwit her, but he didn't know St. Mary Mead's sharpest mind. She would follow him, unravel his lies, and uncover the truth behind the painting's secrets. For now, though, the day was done. She tidied her parlor, locked the doors, and retired to her bedroom, her heart steady and her resolve firm. The painting's shadows could wait until morning. The next day dawned crisp and bright, the village of St. Mary Mead bustling with its usual rhythm. Miss Marple, dressed in her sensible coat and hat, made her way to the post office, where she knew Mrs. Bantry, the postmistress, would be sorting letters with her usual efficiency. If anyone had noticed Harrow's comings and goings, it would be her. "Good morning, Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, peering over her spectacles as Miss Marple entered. "You're up early. Got a mystery on your mind?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Just a small matter, Emily. Have you seen a stranger about lately? A thin man, pale, with unnervous air. He was at the auction last week." Mrs. Bantry's eyebrows shot up, her hands pausing over a stack of envelopes. "Oh, him. Yes, I saw him yesterday, skulking near the church. Looked like he was waiting for someone. Didn't stay long, though caught the afternoon bus to Chipping Cleghorn." "Chipping Cleghorn," Miss Marple repeated, her mind already turning. It was a larger town with a train station that connected to London. Harrow was moving quickly, it seemed. Did he say anything? Or was he alone? Alone. "As far as I could tell," Mrs. Bantry said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "But he was clutching a little book, like he was afraid to lose it. Looked nervous as a cat in a thunderstorm." Miss Marple thanked her and left, her steps purposeful. The sketchbook again. It was clearly important to Harrow, perhaps the key to his interest in the painting. She decided to follow his trail to Chipping Cleghorn, but first, she needed to ensure her cottage was secure. If someone had been in her study, they might return. Back home, she enlisted the help of her young neighbor, Tommy, a sharp-eyed lad who loved a bit of adventure. "Tommy," she said, handing him a shilling, "keep an eye on my cottage this afternoon. If you see anyone poking about, don't confront them, just come find me." Tommy's eyes lit up. "Like a detective, Miss Marple, exactly like a detective," she said, patting his shoulder. "But a discreet one, with her cottage under watch." Miss Marple caught the next bus to Chipping Cleghorn. The town was busier than St. Mary Mead, its streets lined with shops and tea rooms. She made her way to the train station, where she inquired about recent passengers. The ticket clerk, a chatty man with a penchant for remembering faces, recalled a nervous gentleman matching Harrow's description. Buying a ticket to London the previous day, seemed in a hurry. The clerk said, scratching his chin, kept looking over his shoulder, like someone was after him. Miss Marple thanked him and sat on a bench outside the station, her mind working. Harrow was heading to London, likely to pursue whatever secret the painting held. The sketchbook's map, the cryptic note, the frame's hidden compartmental pointed to something hidden, something valuable. But what, and why was Harrow so desperate to reclaim it? As she pondered, a familiar figure caught her eye across the street. It was Clara, the woman from the auction, her dark hair tucked under a stylish hat. She was speaking to a man in a dark suit. Their conversation animated but hushed. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Clara's resemblance to the artist Eliza, as described by the vicar, was striking, and her presence here, so soon after Harrow's departure, was no coincidence. Miss Marple rose, her movements casual, and strolled toward a nearby tea room, keeping Clara in her peripheral vision. She settled at a table by the window, ordering a pot of Earl Grey and a scone to maintain appearances. From her vantage point, she watched Clara and the man part ways. Clara heading toward the station and the man disappearing into an alley. The tea room's chatter provided cover. As Miss Marple jotted notes in her small notebook, Clara's involvement complicated things. Was she working with Harrow or against him? And who was the man in the suit? The painting's mystery was growing, its threads weaving a tapestry far larger than she'd anticipated. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple returned to St. Mary Mead, her mind buzzing with new questions. She stopped by the vicarage to share a quiet word with the vicar, hoping to glean more about Eliza and her connection to the painting. The vicar, frail but sharp, recalled a detail he'd overlooked. Eliza had been rumored to have a daughter, born out of wedlock, who left the village in disgrace. A daughter, Miss Marple murmured, her eyes narrowing, and Clara's resemblance to her interesting. Back at her cottage, she found Tommy waiting, his face flushed with excitement. Miss Marple, I saw someone near your back gate tall, in a dark coat. He didn't go in, just looked around, then left when he saw me. Miss Marple's lips tightened. Well done, Tommy. You're a fine detective. She handed him another shilling, her mind already racing. The man in the dark coat could be the same one Clara was speaking to, or perhaps another player in this increasingly complex game. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting untouched. The painting loomed in the corner, its shadows seeming to whisper secrets only she could hear. Harrow's visit, the disturbed study, Clara's appearance in Chipping Cleghornall were pieces of a puzzle she was determined to solve. She would follow Harrow to London, but she would do so carefully, her steps light and her eyes sharp. The clock struck 9, and Miss Marple rose, her heart steady despite the mystery's growing weight. She checked the locks, drew the curtains, and retired to her bedroom, the painting's eerie presence lingering in her mind. Tomorrow, she would take the train to London, following the trail of Edward Harrow and the secrets he carried. For now, though, the day was done, and St. Mary Mead slept quietly under the stars. Chapter 6. A trail to London. The morning sun cast a soft glow over St. Mary Mead, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage. She sat at her small oak table, a steaming cup of tea in hand, her notebook open before her. The cryptic note from the painting's frame lay beside it, its elegant script taunting her with its mystery. The key to sorrow lies where shadows dance. The words had haunted her sleep, weaving through dreams of Ashford Manor's dusty halls and the nervous stranger, Mr. Harrow, whose furtive glances at the auction still lingered in her mind. She sipped her tea, her sharp eyes tracing the note's loops and flourishes, as if they might yield their secrets under scrutiny. Miss Marple was not one to sit idle when a thread of intrigue presented itself. Her inquiries in the village had already painted a picture of Lord Ashford's obsession with the painting, but Mr. Harrow's behavior suggested a deeper, more immediate motive. His story of the painting as a family heirloom had been too polished, too rehearsed, and the way he pocketed her sketch of the frame confirmed her suspicions. He was after something specific. The question was what and who else might be pulling his strings. She closed her notebook with a decisive snap and rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. If Mr. Harrow was the key to unlocking this puzzle, she would follow him. And her instincts, honed by years of observing human nature, told her his trail led to London. The city, with its bustling streets and shadowed corners, was a far cry from the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead. But Miss Marple was no stranger to its labyrinthine ways. She packed a small valise, her knitting, a few essentials, and the note, carefully tucked into an envelope, and set out for the station. The train to London was a rattling affair, its rhythm soothing despite the urgency of her mission. Miss Marple settled into a window seat, her eyes scanning the passing countryside. She thought of the painting, its muted colors and eerie aura, and the rumors of a curse that clung to it like dust. The village gossip, Mrs. Price, had spoken of Lord Ashford's descent into madness. But Miss Marple suspected there was more to the story than superstition. The note's mention of a key to sorrow suggested something tangible, perhaps hidden in plain sight. And Mr. Harrow's interest hinted at a prize worth pursuing. As the train pulled into Paddington Station, the clamor of London enveloped her. Porters shouted, steam hissed, and the air carried the sharp tang of coal smoke. Miss Marple navigated the crowd with practiced ease, her unassuming figure blending into the throng. She hailed a cab and directed the driver to Bloomsbury, where she'd learned from a discreet inquiry that Mr. Harrow had connections to an art dealer named Mr. Gideon Voss. The shop, Voss and Sons, was tucked away on a narrow street lined with bookshops and antique stores, its sign faded but elegant. The cab rolled to a stop, and Miss Marple stepped out, adjusting her hat. The shop's window displayed a jumble of curios, a gilt-framed mirror, a tarnished silver candelabra, and a small oil painting of a stormy sea. She lingered outside, pretending to admire the display while her eyes darted to the street, searching for any sign of Mr. Harrow. A bell jingled as she pushed open the door, stepping into a dimly lit room that smelled of old wood and varnished dotmur. Voss, a weary man with a neatly trimmed beard and spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from behind a cluttered counter. "Good afternoon, madam," he said, his voice smooth but guarded. "May I assist you with something particular?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression mild but her mind alert. "Oh, I'm just browsing, thank you. I've a fondness for old paintings, you see, something with a bit of history." She moved toward a stack of canvases leaning against the wall, her fingers brushing their edges as she watched Voss from the corner of her eye. "History, you say?" Voss replied, stepping closer. "We've plenty of that here. Perhaps a landscape or a portrait, or something less conventional." His tone carried a hint of suggestion, as if testing her. She tilted her head, feigning indecision. "Perhaps something with a story. I recently acquired a piece at an auction in St. Mary Mead, a rather curious painting. I heard it pass through London dealers once upon a time." Voss's eyes flickered, but his smile remained fixed. "St. Mary Mead, a quaint place. We do get pieces from all over. Can you describe this painting?" Miss Marple gave a vague description, omitting the eerie aura and the hidden note. As she spoke, the bell jingled again, and Mr. Harrow himself stepped into the shop. His coat was rumpled, his face flushed as if he'd been hurrying. He froze upon seeing Miss Marple, his hand tightening on the doorframe. "Miss Marple," he exclaimed, recovering quickly. "What a surprise! Are you shopping for more art?" She turned, her smile serene, but her gaze sharp. "Mr. Harrow, how delightful. I was just telling Mr. Voss about my little find from the auction. It's caused quite a stir, hasn't it?" Harrow's jaw tightened, and he glanced at Voss, who busied himself with a ledger. "Indeed," Harrow said, forcing a laugh. "I was just stopping by to discuss another matter, if you'll excuse me." He moved toward the counter, but Miss Marple stepped lightly into his path, her voice soft but insistent. "Oh, but I'd love your opinion, Mr. Harrow. You seemed so interested in the painting at the auction. Perhaps you know something of its history." Harrow hesitated, his eyes darting to Voss, who cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss this in the back, Mr. Harrow," Voss suggested, his tone clipped. Miss Marple's smile widened. "Oh, don't mind me. I'll just browse a bit longer." She turned to a nearby shelf, her fingers trailing over a dusty frame, but her ears were attuned to the men's retreating footsteps. The shop had a narrow hallway leading to a back room, its door slightly ajar. She edged closer, pretending to examine a cracked porcelain vase, and strained to hear their conversation. "The pigment," Voss, Harrow was saying. his voice low but urgent. It's the only lead we have. If it's what I think, it ties back to the theft in 94 now, 93. The scandal nearly ruined the Ashfords. Voss's reply was quieter. But Miss Marple caught fragments. Dangerous to pursue a vault. Perhaps Ashford Manor. Her heart quickened. A pigment? A theft in the 1890s, and a vault in Ashford Manor. The pieces were falling into place, though the puzzle was far from complete. She moved back to the canvases, her mind racing. The painting's eerie. Aura might be a distraction, but its materials, perhaps a rare pigment, could be the key. And if Harrow was chasing it, someone else might be directing his search. The men emerged from the back room, Harrow's face pale but composed. "Miss Marple," he said, nodding stiffly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." "Oh, I always do," she replied, her tone light, but her eyes locking onto his. He left quickly. The bell jingling in his wake. Voss approached, his smile strained. "Anything catch your eye, madam?" "Not today, I'm afraid," she said, adjusting her gloves. "But I'll be back. Your shop has such fascinating stock." She left him with a nod. Stepping back into the bustling street, the air was crisp, and Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. She hailed another cab, this time to the British Museum's reading room, where she hoped to dig into records of art thefts from the 1890s. The library was a cavernous space, its domed ceiling echoing with the rustle of pages and the soft tread of scholars. She requested a stack of periodicals and auction catalogs from the period. Settling into a leather chair with her notebook, hours passed as she pored over faded newsprint, her fingers smudged with ink. A small article in an 1893 edition of the Times caught her eye, a scandal involving a rare pigment, ultramarine derived from Afghan lapis lazuli, stolen from a London dealer. The theft had been linked to a shadowy figure in the art world, possibly connected to the Ashford family. The pigment was prized not only for its vibrancy, but for its rarity, reserved for masterpieces or, perhaps, for hiding something more valuable. Miss Marple jotted down the details, her handwriting precise. The painting's muted colors didn't suggest ultramarine, but a hidden layer, perhaps revealed under special light, could explain Harrow's interest. And the mention of a vault in Ashford Manor, could it hold the stolen pigment, or something more? She closed the catalogue, her mind turning to the manor's dilapidated halls. A return visit was inevitable. As evening fell, she boarded a train. Back to St. Mary Mead, the city's lights fading into the distance. Her notebook was filled with new clues. The pigment, the theft, the vault. Harrow's involvement suggested a larger scheme, perhaps orchestrated by someone with a deeper stake in the Ashford legacy. She thought of the caretaker's unease, the diary pages hint of a forbidden romance, and the painting's cryptic note. Each piece was a thread, and Miss Marple was determined to weave them together. Back in her cottage, she lit a fire and settled into her armchair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. The painting hung on the wall, its eerie aura undimmed. She studied it, her eyes tracing the faint outlines of its figures, as if they might whisper their secrets. The key to sorrow was out there, waiting to be found, and Miss Marple was ready to follow its trail, her mind buzzing with possibilities, but her heart calm, as always. In the face of a mystery, the journey to London had been fruitful. But Miss Marple knew the real work lay ahead. She sipped her tea, now cold, and opened her notebook again, sketching a plan to revisit Ashford Manor. The vault, the pigment, and Harrow's shadowy employer were pieces of a puzzle that stretched from St. Mary Mead to the heart of London's art world. And Miss Marple, with her quiet determination and unerring instinct, was just the woman to solve it. Chapter 7. The vault's Secreth morning mist clung to the rolling hills of St. Mary Mead. as Miss Marple stepped off the bus, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path leading to Ashford Manor. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of wet grass and old stone, and the manor loomed ahead, its ivy-choked walls and darkened windows brooding under a sky that refused to brighten. She adjusted her tweed hat, her sharp eyes scanning the estate's silhouette. The discoveries from her London trip that art dealer's mention of a hidden vault, and the rare pigment tied to a scandalous theft had set her mind ablaze with possibilities. Somewhere within those crumbling walls, she was certain, lay the next piece of the puzzle surrounding the cursed painting. The caretaker, Mr. Grayson, awaited her at the rusted iron gate, his weathered face etched with reluctance. His coat was patched, his boots scuffed, and his eyes darted nervously as he fumbled with a ring of keys. "Didn't expect you back so soon, Miss Marple," he muttered, his voice rough as the gravel underfoot. "This place ain't good for lingering." Miss Marple offered a polite smile, her hands clasped neatly over her handbag. "Oh, Mr. Grayson, I find old houses like this full of stories. One only needs to listen carefully." Her tone was light, but her gaze was piercing, noting the way his fingers trembled as he unlocked the gate. He was hiding something, fear, perhaps, or guilt. She filed it away, as she always did, for later consideration. The manor's interior was as forbidding as its exterior. The grand hall, once resplendent with chandeliers and polished oak, now sagged under decades of neglect. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the boarded windows, and the air carried a musty chill that seemed to seep into the bones. Miss Marple's footsteps echoed as she followed Grayson, her eyes roving over faded tapestries and cracked portraits of stern-faced Ashfords. The painting's mystery pulsed in her mind, its cryptic note about a key to sorrow, and the diary page hinting at a forbidden romance, tugging at her curiosity like a loose thread. "I'd like to explore the East Wing today," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "The library, perhaps, or the old study. Lord Ashford spent much of his time there, didn't he?" Grayson hesitated, his hand tightening on the lantern he carried. "The East Wing's not safe, miss. Floors are rotten, and the walls, well, they've got their secrets." His eyes flickered to a shadowed corridor, and Miss Marple noted the unease in his posture. "Secrets, indeed. Nonsense," she replied briskly. "I'm sure a quick look won't do any harm. And you'll be with me, won't you?" Her tone was reassuring, but her intent was firm. Grayson muttered something under his breath and led the way, his lantern casting jittery shadows on the walls. The East Wing was a labyrinth of narrow passages and locked doors, the air thick with the scent of mildew and forgotten lives. Miss Marple's keen eyes caught details Grayson likely hoped she'd miss: a scuff mark on a baseboard, too fresh for a house abandoned for decades, a door framed slightly askew, as if recently disturbed. She said nothing, letting him lead her to the library, a cavernous room lined with sagging bookshelves. The shelves were bare in places, books scattered on the floor like fallen leaves, their pages curling with age. Lord Ashford was particular about this room, Grayson said, his voice low. "Spent hours here, staring at that painting of his. Never let anyone touch it." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze sweeping the room. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel carved with intricate vines that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Above it hung a portrait, not the cursed painting, but another, of a young woman with haunting eyes and a secretive smile. Eliza, perhaps the resemblance to Clara, the woman from the auction, was uncanny. Miss Marple stepped closer, her fingers brushing the mantel's edge. The wood was smooth, but a faint seam caught her attention, a hairline crack invisible too. A casual glance, Mr. Grayson, she said, turning to him with a disarming smile. Might we check behind this mantel? Old houses often have surprises tucked away. His face paled. Behind the mantel? Nothing there but dust and spiders, miss. Oh, I'm not afraid of a little dust, she said, her tone cheerful but unyielding. Reluctantly, he helped her shift a nearby table, revealing a faint outline in the wall panel, cleverly disguised by the mantel's shadow. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained serene. This was it, the vault the art dealer had mentioned. Grayson's. Reluctance grew palpable as he pried at the panel with a rusty poker from the fireplace. The wood groaned, then gave way, revealing a small, iron-bound door set into the stone. A heavy padlock secured it, its surface pitted with age but unyielding. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. How fascinating, she murmured. Do you have the key, Mr. Grayson? He shook his head, too quickly. Never seen that door before. Must have been Lord Ashford's doing. He was always hiding things. Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind was racing. Grayson's denial was too emphatic, his posture too tense. He knew more than he was letting on. Well, then, she said, perhaps we can find a way to open it. For curiosity's sake. Grayson muttered an excuse about fetching tools and shuffled off, leaving her alone in the library. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant creak of the manor settling. Miss Marple wasted no time. She examined the padlock, noting its intricate design, a custom piece, likely from the 1890s, matching the era of the painting's scandal. Her fingers traced the door's edges, searching for a mechanism. A faint click sounded as she pressed a corner of the frame, and the lock sprang open with a soft snap. She paused, her breath catching. The ease of it surprised her too easy, perhaps, for a vault meant to guard secrets. She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring Grayson hadn't returned, then pulled the door open. Inside was a narrow recess, barely a foot deep, containing a small wooden box and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The box was locked, its surface engraved with the same vine motif as the mantel. The letters, however, were unprotected, their paper brittle but intact. Miss Marple untied the ribbon with care, her gloved fingers moving deftly. The first letter was addressed to Lord Ashford in a flowing, feminine script. Her eyes scanned the words, and a chill ran through her, not from the cold, but from the raw emotion in the text. My dearest Edmund, it began. I write in haste, my heart torn asunder. The jewels you entrusted to me are safe, hidden where none shall find them. But I cannot stay. The weight of our secret grows too heavy, and I fear discovery. Forgive me, my love, for what I must do. It was signed simply Eliza. The next letter was more frantic, its ink smudged as if written in distress. They suspect, Edmund. They watch me always. The painting holds the truth, but none must know. Burn this when you read it. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The painting was a map, just as she'd begun to suspect. The jewels, likely the ones stolen in the 1890s scandal, were hidden somewhere in Ashford Manor, and the painting's cryptic inscription was the key. But why had Eliza betrayed Ashford, and what had driven her to flee? She tucked the letters into her handbag, her movements swift but precise. The wooden box intrigued her, but it would have to wait. Grayson's footsteps were approaching, heavy and deliberate. She closed the vault door, ensuring the lock clicked back into place, and stepped away just as he re-entered, carrying a crowbar he clearly had no intention of using. No luck, miss, he said, avoiding her gaze. That lock's too old. Best leave it be. Perhaps you're right, she replied, her tone placating. I'll return another day. Thank you for your help, Mr. Grayson. She noted the relief in his eyes, but also something else, a flicker of suspicion, as if he knew she'd found something. As they left the library, a sudden noise echoed through the manor, a sharp crack, like wood splitting. Grayson froze, his lantern trembling. "Just the house," he muttered, but his voice was strained. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The sound had come from above, not the walls. Someone or something was in the manor. "Mr. Grayson," she said calmly. "Is there anyone else here?" "No one," he said too quickly. "Just us," she nodded. But her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the clues, the fresh scuff marks, the disturbed door frame, the noise from above. Someone had been watching her, perhaps following her since London. Harrow, the nervous stranger from the auction, or someone else tied to the shadowy collector the art dealer had mentioned. The walk back to the gate was tense, Grayson's silence heavier than before. Miss Marple kept her observations to herself, her mind a whirl of connections. The letters confirmed Eliz's betrayal, but the jewel's location remained elusive. The painting's map was the key, but decoding it would require time and caution. If someone was watching, they knew she was close. As she boarded the bus back to St. Mary Mead, the letters tucked safely in her handbag, Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile. The day had been productive, the vault's secrets a significant step forward. But the noise in the manor lingered in her thoughts, a reminder that she was not alone in her pursuit. Her heart raced with the thrill of the chase, yet her demeanor remained calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap as the countryside rolled by. Back in her cottage, she lit a fire and spread the letters on her table, her notebook open beside them. The painting hung on the wall, its eerie aura undimmed, as if watching her work. She traced the inscription on its frame, "Key to Sorrow," and murmured to herself, "Not sorrow, perhaps, but truth." The evening settled around her, the village quiet beyond her windows. She was content with her find, but wary. Someone was out there, waiting for her next move. And Miss Marple, ever the strategist, was already planning it. Chapter 8. The village gossip. Morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. She sat at her small breakfast table, a cup of tea steaming gently beside a plate of buttered toast. Her knitting lay abandoned in a basket by the hearth, its needles glinting like tiny swords in the light. The painting from the auction hung on the wall opposite, its muted colors and indistinct figures seeming to watch her with silent intensity. Miss Marple's sharp eyes lingered on it for a moment, her mind turning over the threads of the mystery that had woven itself around the canvas. The letters from the vault, tucked safely in her writing desk, whispered of betrayal and hidden jewels. But the puzzle was far from complete. Today, she decided, was a day for the village, a place where secrets, like dust, settled into every corner and waited for a keen mind to sweep them out. She donned her best tweed coat, its familiar weight settling comfortably on her shoulders, and chose a hat with a modest brim adorned with a single pheasant feather. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and chimney smoke. St. Mary Mead bustled in its quiet way. The baker's boy darted past with a basket of fresh loaves. Mrs. Clement swept the vicarage steps, and a gaggle of children chased a hoop down the lane. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the familiar scene for anything or anyone out of place. The village was a tapestry of habits, and she knew every stitch. A stranger's glance, a missed greeting, or an unfamiliar shadow could unravel a story. Her first stop was the post office, where Miss Hartnell presided with the authority of a general and the curiosity of a magpie. The bell above the door jingled as Miss Marple stepped inside, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the worn floorboards. Miss Hartnell looked up from sorting letters. her spectacles perched precariously on her nose. "Good morning, Miss Marple," she said, her voice bright, but edged with the eagerness of someone who thrived on news. "Out early, aren't you? Not often we see you before noon." Miss Marple's lips curved into a polite smile. "Oh, I like a morning stroll, Miss Hartnell. Clears the mind. And I thought I might catch up on the village talk. You always hear such interesting things." Miss Hartnell's eyes gleamed, and she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the counter. "Well, there's plenty to tell. Did you hear about young Tommy Pierce caught trying to sneak apples from Mr. Giles's orchard again? And then there's Mrs. Price says her prize roses were trampled. But I reckon it's those boys from the council houses, always up to no good." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of attentive interest, though her mind filed away the trivialities. She let Miss Hartnell prattle on, waiting for the moment to steer the conversation. After a pause, she said, "I was at the manor yesterday, you know. Such a shame to see it falling to ruin. I suppose there's been talk about it lately." Miss Hartnell's eyebrows shot up. "Ashford Manor, oh, there's always talk about that place. Cursed. They say ever since Lord Ashford vanished. Mind you, I don't hold with curses, but there's something queer about it. Why, just the other day, Mrs. Price swore she saw a light flickering in one of the upper windows. At midnight, no less. A light." Miss Marple tilted her head, her tone mild but encouraging. "How curious. Perhaps someone was poking about. I heard a young woman's been seen near the manor recently. An artist, perhaps." Miss Hartnell's face lit up like a lantern. "You mean Clara Ashford? Oh, yes. She's back in the village, bold as brass. Turned up a fortnight ago, staying at the Blue Boar. Says she's sketching the countryside. But I saw her myself, lingering by the manor gates with a sketchbook. Odd, if you ask me. Her family's tied to that place. You know Lord Ashford's great niece or some such. Folks say she's after something, though nobody knows what." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. Clara, the woman from the auction, with her sharp cheekbones and guarded eyes. So, like the faded photograph of Eliza, the connection was no coincidence. But Miss Marple kept her thoughts veiled. "An artist, you say? That's interesting. I suppose she's been seen about the village, oh, everywhere," Miss Hartnell said, warming to her topic. "She was at the church last Sunday, though she didn't stay for tea. And Mrs. Weatherby saw her buying paints at the stationer's expensive ones, too. Foreign, she said. Clara's got that city look about her, all modern and aloof, not like her great uncle. From what I hear, he was a proper gentleman, even if he went mad over that painting." Miss Marple's fingers tightened slightly on her handbag. "The painting, yes. I've heard the stories. Do you suppose Clara's interested in it? Family history, perhaps?" Miss Hartnell shrugged, but her eyes narrowed knowingly. "Could be. She's been asking questions, you know. Old Mr. Bantry at the pub said she was pestering him about the manor's history, wanting to know about Lord Ashford's last days. And then there's that stranger Mr. Harrow, calls himself. He was seen talking to her outside the Blue Boar, looking shifty. I wouldn't trust him, not with those darting eyes." The mention of Harrow sent a ripple through Miss Marple's thoughts. The nervous man from the auction now linked to Clara. She filed the detail away, her mind already spinning a web of possibilities. "How intriguing," she murmured. "I suppose I might have a word with Mrs. Price myself. She's always so observant." Miss Hartnell nodded vigorously. "You do that. She's got a tongue like a whip, but she sees everything. Mind you, don't mention the roses. She's still sore about them." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped back into the sunlight, her mind humming. Clara's presence in St. Mary Mead was no accident, and her connection to Harrow suggested a deeper game. The village, with its gossip and half-remembered tales, was proving a richer hunting ground than she'd expected. Her next stop was Mrs. Price's cottage, a tidy affair with a garden that rivaled Kew in its precision. The roses, despite Miss Hartnell's tale, stood proud and untrampled, their petals glowing in the morning light. Mrs. Price answered the door in a flower-dusted apron, her round face flushed from baking. "Miss Marple, what a treat. Come in. Come in, I've just put a sponge in the oven, but there's tea ready." The parlor was a cozy clutter of chintz and china, with a fire crackling despite the mild weather. Miss Marple settled into a cushioned chair, accepting a cup of Earl Grey with a murmur of thanks. Mrs. Price, ever the hostess, launched into a monologue about the village fete, but Miss Marple's gentle questions soon turned the conversation to the manor. "I heard Clara Ashford's been seen about," she said, sipping her tea. "An artist? I understand. Have you noticed her?" Mrs. Price's eyes sparkled with the thrill of gossip. "Oh, yes, she's a queer one. That Clara. I saw her sketching by the manor gates last Tuesday, bold as you like. Had a big sketchbook, and she was drawing the old oak tree now. The one they say Lord Ashford proposed under. But it wasn't just sketching. She kept looking up at the manor, like she was waiting for something. Or someone." Miss Marple's fingers paused on her teacup. "Waiting? That's curious. Did you see anyone with her?" "Not then," Mrs. Price said, leaning closer. "But the next day, I was out walking Pippin, that's my terrier, and I saw her talking to that Mr. Harrow near the churchyard." He looked proper agitated, waving his hands about. She didn't seem pleased, either. "I couldn't hear much, but I caught the word painting more than once. I reckon they're up to something." Miss Marple's mind raced, but she kept her expression mild. "How observant you are, Mrs. Price. I suppose Clara's been asking about the manor's history, though." "She has," Mrs. Price said, nodding. "She came by last week, all polite and city-like, asking if I knew anything about her great-uncle. I told her what my gran told me about Lord Ashford and that artist, Eliza. How he was besotted. Spent all his days with her in that studio of hers. They say she painted that picture you bought." "Miss Marple, the one with the curse." Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her heart quickened. "So I've heard. Did Clara mention the painting?" "Not directly," Mrs. Price admitted, "but she asked about the manor's chapel, of all things. Wanted to know if it was still standing. I told her it's half ruined, but the stained glass is still there. All angels and thorns." She seemed mighty interested. "The chapel." Miss Marple's thoughts darted to the letters from the vault, with their cryptic references to Sorrow's Key and a hiding place. Could the chapel be the next piece of the puzzle? She set her teacup down, her mind already mapping her next move. "You've been most helpful, Mrs. Price. I mustn't keep you from your baking." "Oh, it's no trouble," Mrs. Price said, beaming. "You will let me know if you find anything about that painting, won't you? The village is all aflutter about it." Miss Marple promised to share what she could, though she knew she'd guard her findings closely. As she left the cottage, the sun was climbing higher, and the village seemed to hum with secrets. Clara's interest in the chapel was a new thread, one that tugged at the edges of the mystery. But first, Miss Marple wanted to see the artist. Herself, she made her way to the Blue Boar, the village's only inn, where Clara was staying. The taproom was quiet, save for a farmer nursing a pint and the innkeeper polishing glasses. Miss Marple inquired after Clara and was directed to the garden, where the young woman sat at a wrought iron table, her sketchbook open before her. The sight was striking. Clara's dark hair was pulled back, her face pale and focused as her pencil danced across the page. The sketch, half finished, depicted the manor's silhouette against a stormy sky. Its lines sharp and almost accusing. Miss Marple approached, her footsteps soft on the grass. "Miss Ashford, I hope I'm not disturbing you." Clara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing for a moment before softening into a guarded smile. "Miss Marple, isn't it? I saw you at the auction. You're the one who bought the painting." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, settling onto a nearby chair. "It's a curious piece. I couldn't help but notice your interest in it. And in the manner, I hear." Clara's pencil stilled, and her smile tightened. "It's family history. That's all. My great-uncle owned that painting. I'm curious about him, about his life." "A natural curiosity," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "I've heard such fascinating stories about Lord Ashford, and about Eliza, the artist. Your ancestor, I believe." Clara's eyes flickered, but she nodded. "Yes, Eliza was my great-great-grandmother. She painted that picture." "I'm trying to piece together her story." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of kindly interest. "How admirable. I suppose you've been sketching the manor to capture its spirit?" Mrs. Price mentioned. "Seeing you there, near the gates." Clara's fingers tightened on her pencil, but her voice remained steady. "The manor's beautiful, in its way. I like to draw old places. They have stories." "Indeed they do," Miss Marple said. "And the chapel? I hear it's quite striking, with its stained glass. Have you sketched it yet?" Clara's gaze sharpened, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she saw a flash of fear. "The chapel? No, not yet. I've heard it's in poor shape." "Why do you ask, Oh?" "Just idle curiosity," Miss Marple said, waving a hand. "The village is full of talk, you know. And with you and Mr. Harrow both so interested in the manor, it's only natural people notice." Clara's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Mr. Harrow. He's just someone I met. He's interested in art. That's all." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes never leaving Clara's, of course. "Well, I shan't keep you from your work. Your sketches are lovely. I do hope you'll share them sometime." Clara murmured a polite reply, but her hand trembled slightly as she returned to her drawing. Miss Marple rose, her mind alight with new connections. Clara was hiding something, and her link to Harrow was no casual acquaintance. The chapel, the painting, the jewels, it was all converging, and Miss Marple felt the thrill of the chase. As she walked home, the village seemed to close ranks around her, its familiar faces and routines a comforting backdrop to her racing thoughts. She passed the church, where the vicar was tending the roses, and the baker's, where the scent of fresh bread wafted out. But her eyes were drawn to the manor's distant silhouette, its chimneys stark against the sky. Clara had been sketching it, waiting near it, asking about its chapel. And Harrow, with his nervous glances and stolen sketch, was circling the same mystery. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, her knitting in her lap. The painting stared down at her, its shadows deeper in the evening light. She thought of the letters, of Eliza's betrayal, of the jewels hidden somewhere in the manor's chapel, Clara's fear, Harrow's agitation. Mrs. Price's gossip, it all pointed to a truth buried in the past, waiting to be unearthed. She picked up her needles, the rhythmic click a counterpoint to her thoughts. The village had given her what she needed, a name, a face, a place. Clara was the key. But she was not alone. Tomorrow, Miss Marple decided she would return to the manor, to the chapel with its angels and thorns. For now, she was content to let the puzzle simmer, her evening serene, her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands. The fire crackled, and the painting watched, its secrets safe for one more night. Chapter 9. Clara's confession. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from the garden, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed tea. Miss Marple sat at her small writing desk, her notebook open, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. The painting, now a familiar presence, leaned against the wall, its muted colors seeming to pulse with secrets yet to be fully unveiled. She traced her finger along the cryptic note she'd found in the frame, the words "key to sorrow" etched in her mind like a riddle that refused to be solved. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her movements calm but deliberate, and crossed the room to answer. Standing on the doorstep was Clara, the young woman whose face bore an uncanny resemblance to the mysterious artist Eliza from the faded photograph. Clara's auburn hair was swept back in a loose bun, but a few strands had escaped, framing her pale, anxious face. Her eyes, a striking hazel, darted nervously as though expecting pursuit. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but laced with a quiet authority. "Do come in. I've just put the kettle on." Clara hesitated, her gloved hands twisting the strap of her handbag. "Miss Marple, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." "Of course, my dear," Miss Marple replied, stepping aside to usher her in. "There's nothing a cup of tea and a good chat can't help clarify." Clara entered, her steps tentative, as though the cottage itself might hold traps. She settled into a chintz-covered armchair, her posture rigid. Miss Marple busied herself with the tea tray, giving Clara a moment to gather her thoughts. The clink of porcelain was the only sound as she poured to cups, the steam curling upward like a whispered secret. "You've been on my mind since the auction," Miss Marple said, handing Clara a cup. "There's something about that painting that seems to draw people in, isn't there? Like moths to a flame." Clara's fingers tightened around the saucer. "It's more than that, Miss Marple. It's a weight, a burden." She took a shaky breath, her gaze fixed on the painting across the room. "I know you've been looking into its history. I've heard the village talk. They say you're clever, that you see things others miss." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "People do talk, don't they? But I find it's often the quiet ones who have the most interesting stories." "What's yours, Clara?" Clara set her cup down, untouched, and leaned forward. "I'm Eliza's great-granddaughter. The painting, it's been in my family for generations, passed down like a curse. I came to St. Mary Mead to find it, to end this nightmare." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene, but her mind racing. "A curse, you say? The village loves its tales. But I suspect you mean something more tangible. Why don't you start at the beginning?" Clara's hands trembled as she began. "My grandmother told me stories about Eliza, how she was an artist of rare talent, but a woman haunted by her choices. She painted that piece for Lord Ashford, her lover. It was meant to be a gift, a testament to their love. But something went wrong, terribly wrong. The painting became a map, hiding something he valued more than his title or his wealth. The jewels," Miss Marple murmured, her tone neutral, but her eyes sharp. Clara nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Yes, diamonds, emeralds, a fortune stolen from a French noble during the 1890s. Lord Ashford hid them for Eliza, believing she'd stay with him. But she betrayed him. Or so the story goes. She left, taking the secret of the jewel's location with her. The painting was her way of keeping it safe, but also her way of taunting him." Miss Marple tilted her head, considering. "And you believe the jewels are still out there, waiting to be found?" "I know they are," Clara said fiercely. My family's name has been tainted by Eliz's actions. People called her a thief, a seductress who ruined a nobleman. I want to find those jewels, not for their value, but to return them, to clear her name and mine. Miss Marple set her cup down, her movements deliberate. That's a noble goal, Clara, but it doesn't explain why you were at the auction, or why you've been sketching Ashford Manor, nor does it explain Mr. Harrow's interest in you. Clara's face paled. You know about Harrow. I know he's been watching you, Miss Marple said gently, and I know he's not what he seems. A man claiming a family heirloom doesn't usually pocket sketches or leave a lady's study in disarray. Clara's eyes widened. You saw that. I didn't realize you were so observant. Miss Marple smiled faintly. It's a habit. I'm afraid. Now, tell me about Harrow. What hold does he have over you? Clara's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked impossibly young, a girl caught in a web not of her making. He's blackmailing me, she admitted, her voice barely audible. He found letters, private ones, between Eliza and Lord Ashford. They were in an old trunk my grandmother kept. Harrow stole them years ago, when I was too young to understand their value. He's been using them to force me to help him find the jewels. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. And what does he want with them? He works for someone else, Clara said, her voice trembling. I don't know who. A collector, maybe. Or someone with a grudge against the Ashford family. Harrow's just a pawn, but he's dangerous. He knows I'm close to finding the jewels, and he's desperate. He threatened to publish the letters, to drag my family's name through the mud again. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind sifting through the threads of Clara's story. The painting, the jewels, the letters. It was a tapestry of greed and betrayal woven across generations. But there was something else, a shadow behind Clara's fear. A piece of the puzzle still missing. Clara, she said softly. Why didn't you come to me sooner? You've been carrying this alone, haven't you? Clara's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know who to trust. Everyone in the village talks about you, how you solve mysteries. But I was afraid. Harrow said if I told anyone, he'd destroy the letters and my family's chance at redemption. Miss Marple reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on Clara's. You're not alone anymore, my dear. We'll sort this out together. But I need you to be honest with me. Is there anything else you haven't told me? Anything about the painting, or Harrow, or this collector? Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the painting. There's one thing. The note you found. The key to sorrow. I think it's not just about the jewels. Eliza wrote in her diary that the painting held two secrets, one of wealth, one of pain. I don't know what the second secret is, but I think Harrow does. He's obsessed with it, more than the jewels. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A second secret. That's very interesting. And where is this diary now? It's hidden, Clara said quickly, in a safe place. I didn't bring it with me. It's too risky with Harrow watching. A wise choice, Miss Marple said, nodding. But we'll need to see it, Clara. If there's another secret, it might be the key to stopping Harrow and whoever he's working for. Clara swallowed, her hands twisting together. What do we do now? Harrow's getting impatient. He's been following me, watching the manor. I'm scared, Miss Marple. Miss Marple's expression softened, but her voice was firm. Fear is a powerful thing, Clara, but it's no match for a clear head and a good plan. We're going to outwit Mr. Harrow, but we'll need to be clever. He thinks he's hunting you, but we'll turn the tables. First, though, we need to secure that diary. Where is it? Clara hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice a whisper. It's in the old oak by the manor's gate. There's a hollow in the trunk, covered by moss. I hid it there after I saw Harrow lurking near my lodgings. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already mapping out the next steps. Very well. We'll retrieve it tonight. Under cover of darkness. Harrow won't expect us to move so quickly. In the meantime, you'll stay here. My guest room is small, but it's cozy, and you'll be safe. Clara's eyes widened. You'd do that for me, after everything. My dear, Miss Marple said with a gentle smile. I've seen enough of human nature to know when someone's heart is in the right place. You're trying to right a wrong, and that's no small thing. Now, finish your tea. We've a busy evening ahead. As Clara sipped her tea, her shoulders relaxing slightly, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the painting. The key to sorrow and a second secret intriguing, but dangerous. She glanced at the canvas, its muted colors seeming to shift in the afternoon light. Whatever Eliza had hidden within it, it was more than jewels. It was a story of love, betrayal, and perhaps something darker, something that had driven Harrow to desperation. The day passed quietly with Miss Marple and Clara planning their evening venture. As dusk settled over St. Mary Mead, the village grew still. The only sounds the distant hoot of an owl and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Miss Marple donned her sturdy coat and hat, her appearance unassuming but her resolve steely. Clara, wrapped in a dark shawl, followed her, her face pale but determined. They moved silently through the village, the moon casting long shadows across the cobbled paths. Ashford Manor loomed in the distance, its silhouette jagged against the night sky. The old oak stood at the edge of the property, its gnarled branches swaying gently. Miss Marple held up a hand, signaling Clara to wait as she scanned the darkness for any sign of Harrow. All clear, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Show me the hollow. Clara crept forward, her fingers brushing the rough bark until she found the moss-covered patch. She peeled it back, revealing a small cavity. Inside was a leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. She handed it to Miss Marple, who tucked it into her bag with a nod. Let's not linger, Miss Marple said, her eyes scanning the shadows. We've got what we came for. But as they turned to leave, a rustle in the bushes stopped them cold. Miss Marple's hand tightened on her bag, her heart steady despite the sudden tension. A figure emerged from the darkness, not Harrow, but a young man, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. Miss Marple, he whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Thomas, the caretaker's nephew. I saw you from the manor. You shouldn't be here, it's not safe. Clara gasped, stepping back. But Miss Marple remained calm. Not safe, Thomas. Why is that? He glanced nervously toward the manor. There's someone else here. I saw a man skulking about earlier, near the chapel. I think he's after the same thing you are. Miss Marple's mind raced. Harrow, no doubt. But his presence so close to the manor suggested he was closer to the jewels or the second secret. Then she'd realized. Thank you, Thomas, she said, her voice steady. You'd best get back to your uncle. Leave this to us. Thomas hesitated, then nodded, disappearing into the night. Miss Marple turned to Clara, her expression resolute. We need to move quickly. Harrow's circling. And he's not alone in this game. Let's get back to the cottage and see what Eliza's diary has to tell us. They hurried back, the diary a heavy weight in Miss Marple's bag. Once inside, with the door bolted and the curtains drawn, they sat at the kitchen table, the diary open between them. Its pages were filled with Eliza's elegant script, interspersed with sketches of the painting and cryptic phrases. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the text, her fingers tracing the words. Here, she said, pointing to a passage. Eliza writes, "The sorrow lies not in the stones, but in the heart that holds them. The key is hidden where love was lost." That's the chapel, Clara. The jewels are there. But so is something else, something Harrow wants. Clara's eyes widened. The second secret. But what could it be? Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the painting, its frame gleaming faintly in the lamplight. "I don't know yet, but we'll find out. Tomorrow, we'll go to the chapel. But first, we need to throw Harrow off our scent. I have an idea, but it'll require a bit of cunning and your trust." Clara nodded, her fear giving way to determination. "I trust you, Miss Marple. Whatever it takes to stop Harrow, I'm in." Miss Marple smiled, her mind already spinning a web to trap their quarry. "Good. Now, let's get some rest. We'll need our wits about us tomorrow." As Clara settled into the guest room, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the diary open on her lap. The painting watched her from across the room, its secrets whispering in the silence. She closed her eyes, her thoughts weaving together the threads of the mystery. Harrow, the collector, the jewels, the curse. It was a puzzle, but one she was determined to solve. Her tea had long gone cold, but her mind was alight with purpose. Satisfied with the day's progress, but hungry for the truth. The night deepened, and St. Mary Mead slept, unaware of the drama unfolding in its quiet heart. Tomorrow, Miss Marple knew, would bring answers and perhaps a confrontation. But for now, she was content. Her cottage a haven, her resolve unshaken. Chapter 10. The trap is set. Morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across her parlor. She sat at her small oak table, a cup of tea steaming gently beside her, the painting from the auction leaning against the wall. Its somber hues and cryptic frame seemed to pulse with secrets. But Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with a quiet fire. She had a plan, a delicate, intricate web to ensnare Mr. Harrow, the nervous stranger who had hovered too closely at the auction and later invaded her home with his flimsy tale of heirlooms. The painting was no mere artwork. It was a map to long-hidden jewels, a key to betrayal, and now the bait for her trap. She sipped her tea, her mind weaving through the threads of her strategy. Harrow's desperation had betrayed him, his furtive glances, the sketch he'd pocketed, the disturbed papers in her study. He was no mastermind, merely a pawn, but a dangerous one. She needed to draw him out, to catch him in the act, and perhaps uncover the shadowy figure pulling his strings. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its gossip-laden air and watchful eyes, would be her stage. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her tweed skirt, and crossed to the window. Outside, the village bustled with its usual rhythm. Mrs. Price haggled with the fishmonger, children darted through the square, and the postman cycled past with a cheerful wave. She smiled faintly. The village was her ally, its chatter a chorus she could conduct. She would let slip just enough to stir the pot, a whisper here, a hint there that she had found the jewels hidden by Lord Ashford decades ago. Harrow, she was certain, would not resist. Her first stop was the village shop, where Mrs. Bantry, a woman with a tongue as sharp as her knitting needles, held court behind the counter. The shop smelled of fresh bread and lavender polish, its shelves crammed with jars of sweets and stacks of tinned goods. A bell jingled as Miss Marple entered, and Mrs. Bantry looked up, her eyes alight with curiosity. "Good morning, Jane," Mrs. Bantry said, leaning forward. "You've been scarce lately. Up to something, I wager." Miss Marple's lips curved into a demure smile. "Oh, nothing too exciting, Dolly. Just sorting through some old things from the auction. You remember that painting I bought? The one with the peculiar frame?" Mrs. Bantry's eyebrows shot up. "The cursed one? Everyone's been talking about it. They say it drove Lord Ashford to ruin." Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her tone light but her eyes keen. Though I've found something curious in it. A hidden compartment, if you can believe it. And inside, well, let's just say it might lead to something valuable. Jewels, perhaps. She paused, letting the word hang like a ripe fruit. Mrs. Bantry gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Jewels? Jane, you don't mean Lord Ashford's lost fortune. The ones they say were stolen by that artist woman. Miss Marple shrugged delicately. It's probably nothing. Just an old woman's fancy. But I'm looking into it. Do keep it quiet, Dolly. I'd hate for rumors to spread. Mrs. Bantry nodded vigorously, but Miss Marple knew the seed was planted. By lunchtime, half the village would be buzzing with tales of her discovery. She purchased a tin of biscuits, exchanged pleasantries, and stepped back into the sunlight. Her plan unfolding like a well-played hand of bridge. Next, she visited the vicarage, where the elderly Reverend Clements was pruning his roses. His hands, gnarled but steady, snipped at wayward stems as he greeted her with a warm smile. Miss Marple, what brings you here? Not another mystery, I hope, she chuckled, settling onto a garden bench. I'm afraid so, Reverend. That painting I bought, it's proving more interesting than I expected. I found a note hidden in the frame, and it suggests Lord Ashford hid something precious. I'm beginning to think I've stumbled onto his jewels. The vicar's eyes widened behind his spectacles. Good heavens. You're not serious. Those jewels were the talk of St. Mary Mead 50 years ago. If you found them. I haven't. Not yet, she said, her voice soft but deliberate. But I'm close. I just need to be careful. There are curious people about. Reverend Clements frowned, his shears pausing. You mean that fellow who visited you? Harrow, wasn't it? Shifty sort, if you ask me. Miss Marple nodded, her expression grave. I suspect he's after the same thing. But don't breathe a word, Reverend. I'd rather keep this between us. Of course, he said, but his eyes darted toward the village square, where a group of women chatted near the fountain. Miss Marple suppressed a smile. The vicar was a good man, but his discretion was as reliable as a sieve. By evening, the village hummed with whispers. Miss Marple, sipping tea in her parlor, could almost hear the rumors weaving through the lanes. Miss Marple's found Lord Ashford's jewels, hidden in that old painting, no less. She had set the stage. Now she needed an audience. She telephoned Constable Evans, a young man with more enthusiasm than experience, and invited him for tea the following morning. He arrived promptly at 9, his uniform crisp, his notebook at the ready. Miss Marple, you said it was urgent, he asked, accepting a cup of Earl Grey. Not urgent, precisely, she said, her tone calm. But I need your help, Constable. I believe someone may try to break into my cottage tonight. That painting I bought at the auction, it's attracted some unwanted attention. Evans's eyes widened. A break-in, here? Who'd dare? A man named Harrow, she said, folding her hands. He's been asking questions, and I caught him tampering with my study. I've let slip that I've found something valuable. In the painting jewels, perhaps, if he's as desperate as I think, he'll come tonight. Evans straightened, his chest puffing out. I'll be here, ma'am. We'll catch him red-handed. Miss Marple smiled. Discreetly, Constable. I'd like him to feel safe enough to try. Perhaps you could wait in the garden shed. It has a clear view of the back door. Evans nodded, scribbling in his notebook. Right? I'll bring my torch and keep watch. What time should I be here? 10 o'clock, she said, and do bring a warm coat. It's chilly out there. As night fell, Miss Marple prepared her cottage with the precision of a chess master. She left the painting propped on an easel in the parlor, its frame catching the lamplight. The back door was left slightly ajar, a tempting invitation. She scattered a few papers on her desk, nothing incriminating, just enough to suggest she'd been studying the painting's secrets. Then she retired to her armchair, a novel in hand. Though her eyes never left the clock dot at 10:30, a faint creak sounded from the back door. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. She set her book aside and listened. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, moved through the kitchen. A shadow flickered across the parlor doorway, and there was Mr. Harrow, his lean frame hunched, his eyes darting like a cornered fox. He wore dark gloves and a wool cap pulled low, but his nervous energy betrayed him. He froze when he saw the painting, then crept toward it, his breath hitching. Miss Marple watched from the shadows, her knitting needles silent in her lap. Harrow's fingers traced the frame, probing for the hidden compartment she'd mentioned in her carefully planted rumors. He muttered to himself, his voice low but audible, "It's got to be here. The jewels. He'll pay a fortune." Miss Marple cleared her throat softly. Harrow spun around, his face pale, a small crowbar slipping from his hand to the floor with a clatter. "Good evening, Mr. Harrow," she said, her voice as calm as a summer breeze. "Looking for something?" He stammered, his eyes wide. I thought you were asleep. I didn't mean to break into my home," she finished, rising from her chair. "Or to steal what you think I've found. I'm afraid you've been misinformed, Mr. Harrow. There are no jewels here, only a trap." Before he could bolt, Constable Evans burst through the back door, his torch beam pinning Harrow like a moth. "Stay where you are," Evans barked, his voice more confident than Miss Marple had expected. Harrow raised his hands, his bravado crumbling. "I didn't do anything," he protested. "I was just looking." "Looking with a crowbar?" Miss Marple said, arching an eyebrow. "Constable, perhaps you'd like to take Mr. Harrow to the station for a chat." Evans nodded, cuffing Harrow with a practiced motion. "Come on, you. Let's go." As Evans led him away, Harrow's eyes locked on Miss Marple, a mix of fear and defiance in his gaze. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he muttered. "He won't stop." Miss Marple tilted her head. "And who might he be?" "Mr. Harrow." But Harrow clamped his mouth shut, his lips a thin line. Evans ushered him out, and the cottage fell silent once more. Miss Marple crossed to the painting, her fingers brushing the frame. Harrow's words echoed in her mind. He won't stop. Someone was behind this. Someone with deeper pockets and darker motives than a petty thief like Harrow. She returned to her armchair, picking up her knitting. The trap had worked, but the game was far from over. She glanced at the painting, its shadows seeming to shift in the lamplight. Who was pulling Harrow's strings? The art dealer in London? The mysterious collector she'd yet to unmask? Or someone closer, hidden in the heart of St. Mary Mead? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm against the nights. Quiet. She was pleased with her evening's work. Harrow caught the constable's confidence bolstered, and a new thread to tug in her unraveling mystery. But her curiosity burned brighter than ever. She would find the puppet master, no matter how deeply they hid. For now, though, she allowed herself a small smile. Her cottage warm, her tea cold, and her heart steady. The painting watched from its easel, silent but heavy with secrets yet to be told. Chapter 11. The dealer's deception. The train rattled rhythmically as it carved its way through the misty countryside, carrying Miss Jane Marple back to London. The compartment was nearly empty, save for a young man dozing in a corner, his newspaper slipping from his lap, and an elderly woman fussing with a thermos of tea. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly, her mind far from the gray-green fields blurring past. The painting from Ashford Manor, with its cryptic inscription and hidden compartment, occupied her thoughts. The trap she had set for Mr. Harrow in St. Mary Mead had yielded results. He was detained, but stubbornly silent about his employer. Now, a new lead pointed her to the heart of London's art world, where secrets, she suspected, were as carefully curated as the paintings themselves. Her notebook, tucked in her handbag, held a scribbled clue, a receipt from the art dealer's shop, glimpsed during her earlier visit. It bore a name, Gallery d'Orsay, and a symbol matching the one etched into the painting's frame, a crescent moon pierced by an arrow. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly as she considered the dealer, Mr. Lucien Duval, whose polished demeanor had not entirely masked his unease when she mentioned the painting. He knew more than he had let on, and she intended to find out what. The train pulled into Paddington Station with a hiss of steam, and Miss Marple stepped onto the platform, her modest hat slightly askew from the journey. London greeted her with its usual clamor, cabbies shouting, newsboys hawking papers, and the distant clang of trams. She hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address of Duval's shop in Mayfair, a narrow street lined with galleries and antique stores. The shop itself was unassuming, its sign discreet, but the window displayed a single, luminous oil painting of a Venetian canal, hinting at treasures within. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and linseed oil. Paintings lined the walls, portraits, with haughty gazes, landscapes glowing with improbable light, and still lifes of fruit so vivid they seemed edible. Mr. Duval stood behind a mahogany counter, arranging a set of miniature frames. He was a slight man, with slicked back hair and a pencil mustache that twitched when he saw her. "Miss Marple," he said, his French accent smooth but tinged with wariness. "What a pleasure to see you again. Have you reconsidered selling that intriguing painting?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling with deceptive warmth. "Oh, no, Mr. Duval. I've grown rather fond of it. But I do have questions. May we speak privately?" Duval hesitated, then gestured to a curtained alcove at the back of the shop. "Of course. This way, please." The alcove was a small, velvet-draped space with a single armchair and a low table holding a silver cigarette case. Miss Marple declined the seat, preferring to stand, her hands clasped lightly over her handbag. "I won't keep you long," she began, her tone conversational. "But I've learned something curious about the painting from Ashford Manor. It seems to be of great interest to certain parties. A man named Harrow, for instance." Duval's mustache quivered, but he maintained his composure. "Harrow, I'm afraid I don't know the name." "Really?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her gaze steady. "He was in your shop not long ago, inquiring about a rare pigment. The same pigment, I believe, used in my painting." And he mentioned a collector, a rather determined one. Duval's fingers tightened on the cigarette case, betraying a flicker of unease. "Many people inquire about pigments, Miss Marple. It's hardly unusual in my trade." "Perhaps," she said, undeterred. "But this collector seems particularly keen. And I couldn't help but notice your receipt bore a symbol, a crescent moon with an arrow, the very same symbol on my paintings. Frame a curious coincidence, don't you think?" The dealer's face paled, and he busied himself lighting a cigarette, his hands trembling slightly. "A common motif in art, I assure you. Heraldic, decorative, or a mark of ownership." Miss Marple interrupted gently. "Perhaps of someone who once possessed the painting, or still wishes to." Duval exhaled a thin stream of smoke, his eyes narrowing. "You are a perceptive woman, Miss Marple. But I deal in art, not conspiracies. If you've come to accuse me of something, I must ask you to be plain." "Oh, I accuse no one." she said, her voice mild as ever. I merely seek the truth, and I suspect you know more about this collector than you shared. A name, perhaps? The dealer stubbed out his cigarette with unnecessary force. For a moment, silence hung between them, thick as the velvet drapes. Then, with a sigh, he leaned forward, his voice low. Very well, but you must understand, Miss Marple. I am a businessman, not a hero. The collector is a private individual, wealthy, influential, and not fond of questions. I act as his agent, nothing more. And his name? She pressed, her tone still gentle but unyielding. Duval hesitated, then muttered, Lord Reginald Ashford. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. Ashford, as in Ashford Manor? His son, Duval clarified, his voice barely above. A whisper, the old lord's heir, though they were estranged. He lives in seclusion now, in a village not far from London. He's obsessed with that painting, says it's rightfully his. I don't know why, and I don't ask. He pays well, and I facilitate. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Lord Ashford's son, estranged and reclusive, yet desperate to reclaim the painting. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align, but the picture remained incomplete. And Mr. Harrow, she asked, was he acting on Lord Reginald's orders? Duval shifted uncomfortably. Harrow is a hired man, a bit rough, but discreet. He was to secure the painting by any means necessary. When you outbid him, he came to me in a panic. I told him to let it go, but he trailed off, his eyes darting to the curtain as if expecting an eavesdropper. But he didn't. Miss Marple finished. And now he's in custody, which must be inconvenient for your client. Duval's lips pressed into a thin line. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Marple. Lord Reginald is not a man to cross. If you're wise, you'll sell the painting to him and be done with it. Miss Marple's smile was serene, but her eyes gleamed with resolve. I'm not one for selling what I've only begun to understand. But thank you, Mr. Duval. You've been most helpful. She turned to leave, but Duval's voice stopped her. Wait. If you're determined to pursue this, there's something you should know. Lord Reginald frequents a gallery, the Gallery d'Orsay, in Bloomsbury. He's there often, inspecting new acquisitions. You might find answers there. Miss Marple inclined her head. I appreciate the advice. Good day, Mr. Duval. She stepped back into the shop's main room, her heart quickening with the thrill of a new lead. The Gallery d'Orsay was her next destination, but first, she needed to confirm Duval's story. As she exited the shop, she noticed a man loitering across the street, a burly figure in a drab coat, his face half hidden by a scarf. He turned away as her eyes met his, but not before she noted the bulge of a notebook in his pocket. A reporter, perhaps, or one of Lord Reginald's men. She filed the observation away, her steps brisk as she hailed another taxi. The Gallery d'Orsay was a grander affair than Duval's shop, its facade adorned with gilded lettering and flanked by marble urns. Inside, the air was cool and hushed, the walls lined with masterpieces that seemed to whisper their own histories. Miss Marple wandered the galleries, her modest appearance drawing little attention from the well-dressed patrons. She paused before a series of portraits, her eyes scanning for the Crescentandero symbol. It appeared, subtly, in the corner of a small still life bowl of pomegranates, their ruby flesh almost luminous. A gallery attendant, a young woman with a crisp bob and a name tag reading Eleanor, approached. Can I help you, madam? Miss Marple smiled warmly. Oh, I'm just admiring this piece. Such a curious symbol in the corner. Does it signify anything particular? Eleanor glanced at the painting, her expression guarded. It's a mark, Of provenance, I believe, from a private collection. The owner is particular about his acquisitions. Lord Reginald Ashford. Perhaps Miss Marple ventured, her tone innocent. Eleanor's eyes widened briefly, then narrowed. I'm not at liberty to discuss our clients, madam. If you're interested in purchasing, I can fetch the curator. No need, Miss Marple said, patting the girl's arm. I'm only browsing. But thank you. She moved on, her mind cataloging the exchange. The symbol's presence confirmed Duval's story, but Eleanor's reaction suggested Lord Reginald's influence extended beyond mere collecting. As she explored further, she noticed a door marked private at the gallery's rear, guarded by a man in a dark suit. His posture was too alert for a mere employee, and his eyes followed her as she lingered near a display of etchings. Pretending to study a nearby watercolor, Miss Marple overheard a snatch of conversation from two patrons nearby. Reginald's in today, one whispered. Locked himself in the vault with that new shipment. Obsessed, if you ask me. Always. Has been, the other replied, ever since his father's scandal. Thinks the past is hidden in those canvases. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The vault. If Lord Reginald was examining a new shipment, perhaps it included clues to the paintings. Secrets? She needed to get closer, but the guard's presence made that impossible for now. Instead, she purchased a small catalog from the gallery's desk, noting the Crescentandero symbol embossed on its cover. It would serve as a reminder, and perhaps a key to the mystery's next layer. As she left the gallery, the afternoon light had faded to a soft dusk, and London's streets glowed with the flicker of gas lamps. Miss Marple decided against returning to St. Mary Mead that night. Instead, she booked a room at a modest hotel nearby, her mind too restless for the long train journey. Settling into her room, she spread her notebook on the desk, jotting down the day's discoveries, Duval's confession, Lord Reginald's identity, the gallery d'Orsay, and the mysterious vault. She sipped a cup of chamomile tea, her thoughts circling the painting. Its cryptic note, the key to sorrow lies where shadows fall, seemed to point to Ashford Manor. But Lord Reginald's involvement suggested a broader web. Was he after the jewels Clara sought? Or something more personal? The curse, dismissed by many as superstition, loomed in her mind not as a supernatural threat, but as a metaphor for a truth too painful to face. Miss Marple closed her notebook, her day's work complete. Tomorrow, she would visit Lord Reginald's village, seeking the man himself. For now, she was content with her progress. The mystery was unfolding, each clue a thread in a tapestry she was determined to unravel. As she turned down the lamp, the faint glow of London's skyline filtered through her window, a reminder that even in the city's bustle, secrets waited patiently for those who knew where to look.